Hello, and welcome once again to BrightStreamTV. I'm your host, William Everhart, and this week we're going to be talking about Adobe Audition. This is going to be a bit of a sprint course, so we're going to take you through the basics of using this very powerful audio editing tool. We're going to take a look at some of the basic opportunities that you will have to use this particular product, maybe in, let's say, an e-learning environment. And that's really where this course is structured. It's towards that e-learning environment. But of course, what you learn here, you can use in any type of audio or video production. All right, well, let's take a look at the topics we have for today. The first thing we want to do is take a look at the Adobe interface. For this particular tool, if you're familiar with some of the other interfaces, it's similar, but there are some unique features here, so I want to point those out to you. Then we're going to take a look at what I call the audio basics, and really in here we're going to take a look at some terminology that you really need to be familiar with before you start editing audio. Of course, we're going to have some equipment in place, so we're going to take a look at some basic audio equipment. I'm going to give you some of the recommendations for different types of audio input. And we'll take a look at the setup process. How do we configure these pieces of equipment for working with Adobe Audition? Once we get the setup in place, then we're going to take a look at how to import various audio files into Adobe Audition. I'm going to take you a little bit of a tour on how to record your own audio, maybe for some voiceover work. And then we'll take a look at some basic audio editing. I'll show you how to enhance audio quality. And then, of course, you have to do a little bit of work with cleaning up your audio, removing noises and other things that you really just don't want. And then finally, we're going to take a look at publishing your audio. So as you can see, once again, we have a lot to pack into this particular course, but hopefully this is going to take you from start to finish, from the input all the way through to the output of the audio production process. So as I mentioned in the introduction here, the Adobe Audition interface is very similar to some of the other Adobe products, but it does have some unique features, and it's worth pointing those out. So I'm going to jump over to Audition here. Now I'm currently using the Adobe Audition CC 2015 for this particular episode. In here you'll see that there is a nice kind of a dark feel to the entire interface, and this is kind of a new thing for Adobe. They've been experimenting with this with some of the other tools as well, and it just kind of helps draw your attention to the more important areas, which are going to be much brighter and much more colorful. But the actual interface itself is kind of dark. Okay? Across the top we have, like most applications, a menu bar, and clicking on this will reveal a menu, and you will possibly have some submenus here. Now anything that's grayed out, of course, is not accessible. I can try to click on this item, it's not accessible. Okay? You may also find keyboard shortcuts in here. So like if I go to the effects menu, you can see here I have an effects rack, and there is a keyboard shortcut for it. So there'll be some of these items listed for you. Now below this menu bar is a little toolbar. It's kind of a quick access toolbar, if you will. So it allows me to show my waveform and my multi-track. In this case, when I click on one of these elements, it's actually trying to create a new file. So it's more than just toggling a particular window on. If I don't actually have an audio file open, it assumes that I want to create one. So I'm not going to do that for now. That's a little bit later. Once we do have an audio file open, then we have various tools here that we can use, and they're listed just right across the top here. And then to the right of that, I also have what we call workspaces. Now, if you've worked with other Adobe products, you're probably familiar with a workspace. It is the layout of the rest of this content that's on the page. So I can switch to a different workspace here. This is kind of unique. Normally in most of the other apps there is a menu bar in the upper right hand corner of the screen that would list your workspaces. But for all of the audio and video tools within the Adobe family, they have decided to create a small little ribbon here, if you will. So just clicking on these elements here switches that workspace. So as you can see, when I click on these different workspaces, those panels just tend to move around. Now there are a few other ones over here, and I can see this small little chevron here. It's kind of pointing to the right. If I click on that, that will list some of the other workspaces that are available to me. So I'm just going to try one of these here, Mastering and Analysis, and you can see it just changes which panels are open and the location of those panels on the screen. For the purposes of this course, I'm going to go back to the default workspace. So I'll just click on that and it resets these panels. Much like any other Adobe product, you can customize this interface. So for me, the levels down here at the bottom center of my screen, this is something that's really important to me. This is monitoring the audio levels within whatever file I have open. So I don't particularly care for this in a horizontal view. So what I can do is I can just mouse over the panel here and I can click and hold and start dragging it. And then I'm going to start seeing these gray swatches and purple swatches here. And this is just telling me that if I release the mouse now, it's going to insert the panel that I'm dragging into this area, the purple area. So I can put it above or to the side of this editor panel. And I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to drag it all the way over here to the far right. Now, I'm going to go just a little bit further here, all the way to the edge of my screen. Now, instead of the purple, I'm seeing a green. Now, depending on your version of Audition, the colors may be a little different between the purple or the green or whatever, but that's okay. The idea here is that the area that's being highlighted, that's the area in which it's going to insert this panel. So I'm going to release the mouse, and now I have this huge levels panel, and I really don't need that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crush this down, and this panel is also still listing horizontally. See my little numbers here? They're going horizontally. Okay? I want them to run up the right-hand side here. So some of the other things that I can do. Most all of these panels, they have a menu. Now in other Adobe applications, that menu is over on the far right. Here in Audition, they're right beside the name of that panel. So there's three little lines here. So if I click on this, I can choose things like, oh, let's undock this panel. Now I can float it as such. If I drag this, I could put it onto the monitor. If I drag it over here to the side, it's really just going to push it off of the screen. It's not going to redock it. So in order to redock this, I have to go back to this little menu, and normally I could redock it. Okay? If it's not going to let you do this for whatever reason, okay, you can always reset this, and that's the great thing about it. If I close this panel, I can bring it back. So if I go up here to the default menu, this is my default workspace. It too has a small menu here. If I click on this, I can say, hey, go ahead and reset this back to the original layout. So if I do that, it brings back my levels panel. And any other change that I might have made to this existing workspace, well, it'll just reset it. So you can move the panels around much like you do any other of the Adobe tools here. You can move these panels around, get them fitting the way you want. And once you're happy with it, you can also, you could create your own little workspace. So if I started with one of these workspaces and they said, well, I just want to modify this a little bit, then I could save that as my own custom workspace. So once again, I have the various workspaces here I can switch between. I think for this course, probably the best one is going to be either the default or the one I have here is called a classic workspace. And so Once again, these are just different pre-saved layouts of the panels. And like I said, you can always move these. If I slide this over here to the right, I can attach that levels to the right side of my screen. And when I attach it here, the numbers, the scale is vertical now. And that's really what I want. So I want to just make it a little bit narrower. So I've just dragged my levels panel to the right. And now I'm going to mouse over the small dividing line between the levels panel and my editor panel here. And I'm just going to drag that to the right. And it's going to make this levels panel much narrower, because I really don't need it super wide like that. I just need to see the numbers, and I need to see the 2 little meters that are inside of it. So that's the way I like to work with it. Now, as I said, you can customize this to your heart's content. So what you want to do here is kind of find your way around the environment. Find the panels that you use most often. Arrange those panels the way you like to work with Audition. Now, maybe you say, well, in some cases I like having this panel on the right. In other cases, I'd rather have that panel on the bottom, or maybe I don't need that panel at all. I need a completely different panel. And that is totally okay. You can create multiple custom workspaces for the way you like to work. But you really need to experiment with this tool, play around with it a little bit, edit some files before you have a true understanding of what panels you need, what panels you don't need. All right, well, that is the conclusion, if you will, of the interface itself. Like I said, it's much like some of the other Adobe tools. If you're familiar with those, the concept of the panels, it's relatively the same. There's just some minor differences there as far as when you're manipulating those panels and moving them around. But it's pretty easy to pick up on. All right, well, let's take a look at what we have next. Let's jump into some of the tools and things that you're going to need for working with Adobe Audition. So first, some terminology here. And the first term here is going to be frequency. Now, frequency is kind of like, I don't want to say the speed of the sound, because that's not exactly right, but it's the speed of the signal that sound gives off. So the vibration, the way our ears work is that we have an eardrum inside, and it is struck by, well, in this case, air. And that is the sounds that we hear. Now, the number of times that our eardrum is struck per second, well, that's frequency. And this is measured or described in hertz. Now, you'll also hear kilohertz. It's the same thing, it's just 1,000 hertz, okay? So, as I've pointed out here in the slide, the more vibrations per second, okay? So, our eardrum is being struck faster, then that is a higher pitch sound. So, very high, tinny sounds, if you will, very high pitch, that is striking your ear faster than, say, a very low or bass sound. Okay? So just some examples here. A 40 hertz sound is a very low bass, but a 16,000 hertz or 16 kilohertz is more of a treble sound. It's a higher sound. Now, humans typically, the average human can hear between 20 hertz, and that's at the low end, and 20,000 hertz or 20 kilohertz, and that's closer to the high end. Now, some younger folks, when we're in our teens and maybe a little earlier, we can actually hear a little bit higher range than that, but for the most part, that is an average there, between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. So let's take a look at this from Adobe Audition's standpoint. In Audition, it will display the frequency in this manner. So I have a sound here that I've captured. There's actually 2 sounds. And this is the Waveform Display. This is where we're going to spend a lot of our time in Adobe Audition. So on the left, this is a lower frequency. If you look at the spikes that are emanating from the center of the screen there, The distance between those spikes is the frequency. Okay? This is how often that air is striking your eardrum. So it's a lower frequency. Whereas over here on the right, you can see that the spikes are much closer together. There's not as many gaps between them. So that's a much higher frequency. Okay? If we take a look at one of Adobe Audition's other ways to display information, this is their spectral frequency display. This just gives us a little bit different way to display this. The frequency is rated on the right-hand side of the screen. Okay? So over here you have a range, and you can adjust this range, but by default it's going to run around 200 all the way up to 18K. Okay? But like I said, you can adjust that, make it a little wider range if you need to. Now here, the height of the sound here, the higher it is, the higher the pitch. Okay? The lower it is on this scale, vertically, the lower the pitch. Okay? Now the sound here is being displayed as the color. Okay? So normally it's just black. If there's no sound, it's just black. As we start to hear a little bit of noise here, then it's going to start turning purple, and then it's going to go brighter and brighter. Once we get up into these yellows that you're seeing here along the bottom, that is a much louder sound. So the frequency is the vertical measure, and then the loudness is the brightness of the color. And we're going to spend some time here in the spectral frequency display as well. Now the next term you need to be familiar with is amplitude. So this is the strength or the level of the audio pressure. So how fast that air pressure is striking our eardrums is the frequency, that's the pitch. Amplitude is how hard it is hitting your eardrum. So this is going to be, well, the volume. And this is typically measured in decibels. Okay? So once again, if we take a look at the waveform display, this is the same waveform we were looking at earlier. And the one on the left, of course, is the lower frequency because the spikes are spread further apart. But it's also the louder sound, the height of those spikes. That determines the volume, if you will. So in this case, over here on the right of this screen, that is your amplitude. Okay? And it actually starts in the center of the screen there. As you can see, this little waveform, between the two sounds, there's just like a little flat line in there. And that is just basically zero sound or very little sound. So you have a left and right channel in this case, and they are just kind of bouncing out from there. Okay? So the longer the spikes, the louder it is. The further apart the spikes are, the lower the pitch is. Of course, the sound on the right, even though it's a higher pitch, the spikes are closer together, the spikes are much shorter, so it's much quieter. The last term we want to take a look at here is sample rate. Now, this comes into play when we start capturing sound. And this is very important when we are using digital devices. So sound, as I speak here, that is just kind of like a live sound. It's just constant noise, if you will. Hopefully it's a pleasant noise for you, but that is a constant rate. There is no set speed for that, okay? With a sample rate, these digital devices, they have to listen, record, listen, record, listen, record. And so that is the sample rate. It's the speed at which the sound is captured by a digital device. Now, here's the confusing part, is the fact that this is also measured in hertz. But if you think about that, the frequency, the rate at which sound strikes our eardrum, that's also measured in hertz. So this is basically our digital device. It's acting as an eardrum. How fast can it capture that sound? Okay? Now, the more samples per second, it doesn't mean it's a higher pitch. It just means that it's a more accurate capture. Now, if you have a really high sample rate, yeah, you're going to have a really accurate capture of that sound. It's going to be very robust, but it's also going to be a very large file size. So you have to kind of balance it out. And how do you know what is the right sample rate? Well, here's a rule of thumb. Your sample rate should be twice the highest frequency you're capturing. So remember that frequency is the pitch, okay? So higher pitch, higher tinny sounds, treble if you will. The lower frequency is the bass sounds. So if you can kind of get a sampling of that sound while you're recording, and you can watch the meter as you record, and you can see, okay, how far is that meter striking? What is the hertz or kilohertz? What's the maximum I'm hitting there? And then from there, take roughly twice that, that level, and that should be your sample rate. All right, so those are really the primary terms, the frequency, the amplitude, and your sample rate. If you get those down and you understand those concepts, then working in Adobe Audition is going to be a lot easier for you. Now, of course, those terms are going to be things that you may know the definition of, but really putting them into action, well, that's hopefully what I'm going to show you here in the upcoming lesson files is, okay, I'm listening for this, so I know that's a certain frequency, and maybe I can pinpoint that sound based on its frequency in maybe either waveform or the spectral display. And then I can identify that sound and either remove it or enhance it. So really important for you to learn those basic terms. Now there's plenty of other terms that deal with audio editing, and feel free to research that on your own. But for now, those three terms, if you can get those three concepts down, then that's all you really need to know to get started in Adobe Audition. So let's take a look at some equipment that you're going to need. Now here in the studio, kind of as a prop here, I have a microphone and then I have a headset. And that's probably the first thing I'm going to talk about is this headset. This particular one is made by Sony. I can give you a part number here or model number MDR7506. That may not mean anything to you because these are quite a few years old, but they are a studio monitor type of headset. Now here's the important thing. See these huge cups? These are like the old style. And I can say that because I'm a child of the 70s myself. So this is the old style. This is what we had. And guess what? This is still one of the best ways to listen to audio. It's going to surround your ear and it's going to protect your eardrums from interfering noises in the surrounding area. So this is a great way to monitor your audio, whether you're doing it as you record, which is also a very good thing to do, or after the fact. So anytime I'm editing in Audition, I've got these big boys here on. So just to show you, I'm going to demonstrate here. And now I can barely hear anything that's going on in the room. So there you go. Now, different manufacturers, I just happen to use Sony here. The other thing I like about these particular mics or headsets is the jack input. And I know this is very difficult to see, but basically this has a 1/4 inch tip. This is for most of my audio equipment, my professional audio equipment. But what if I'm working on my computer? My computer doesn't have that large of a tip here. So the nice thing about this is that it unscrews and reveals the smaller, which is a 3.5 millimeter, I believe, or roughly 1/8 inch. So this is pretty standard. This is on most of your audio devices, such as your computer, your smartphone, your tablets, things like that. They'll all use this type of tip for the most part. But when you need to, this particular one, like I said, has an adapter to go to the larger. So a great thing to have a good set of headphones, okay? The other thing I have here is just a little studio mic, and I'm going to talk about this in a little more detail. So let's take a look at some of the equipment that we're going to need in addition to these pieces here. Okay, so I mentioned the headphones. Now, like I said, it doesn't matter what brand you get, but I really prefer the over-the-ear type, those larger ones, rather than something like little earbuds. they just seem to work a lot better. I get a lot better results when I use that type of headset. As far as the microphones go, well, you have some choices here. Now, depending on the type of audio work that you're going to be capturing. So this is all about capturing. If you're just editing audio, you're not going to need the microphone. But if you intend to capture it, then obviously you're going to need a microphone to do so. So with the microphones, you have different types here, and I have them listed here. And so you have your desktop mic, and this is just kind of your standard little microphone. You can see this particular one, no particular brand. This a lot of times will even come with some computers, and it has that small 3.5 millimeter or 1/8 inch jack on the end of it, a little plug. You'll denote that the jack itself, and it might be difficult to see here, actually has 2 rings inside of it, so that is actually divided into 3 different sections, and that allows it to, create an input into your computer. So not that matters a whole lot, but if you have like a headset that has the headphones and the mic built in, you want to watch the number of rings that's on the plug there. Okay, so a standard desktop mic like this, they're inexpensive, but they're not the best quality in the world. So while you can pick one of these up for 10 bucks or so, you get what you pay for, and you might have to work a little harder in Adobe Audition to get some usable audio from one of these mics. So what if you step it up a notch? That's going to be a studio mic. Okay? And this is the mic that I have here in studio. This is from a company called Blue Microphone, and this particular model is called the Yeti. The really nice thing about these is the fact that they are, they're completely digital. This thing connects directly to your computer. You don't need another piece of equipment between this mic and the computer to start capturing. So this one actually uses USB for its input. And it is truly a plug and play, both on Mac operating systems and Windows-based systems. You plug this in, it will find its own driver or use a default driver, and you are ready to go. Now, what I'm using here in studio is a lavalier mic. Now, why would I choose a lavalier mic over a studio mic? Well, in this case, we have a studio here. We have some noises. We have some noisy neighbors here as well. And so occasionally there's some noises going on around there. And this microphone, because it's closer to my voice, hopefully is not picking up that ambient sound that's in the room. So these are great for things like a studio setup like what we have here, or maybe if you're doing some type of interview or anything like that. So my target speaker here, myself, not moving around a whole lot. You see, I'm kind of positioned here to the desk. The desktop microphone would work great for that type of scenario too, especially if you're just doing voiceover work. These mics tend to be a little bit less expensive than the lavalier mic that I have on. And the lavalier mic, in this particular case, it needs some additional audio hardware to actually capture. And that's all part of that studio experience. So the lavalier mic is great if you're going to have especially multiple people that are going to be speaking, kind of like an interview type of situation. So that's why they'll use this a lot of times in news broadcasts and things like that. So lavalier mics. Now the other downside to maybe a lavalier mic, could be a downside for you, is the price. These can get quite expensive very, very fast. Whereas the Blue microphone here, the Yeti here, is around $100, $125, depending on where you pick it up. The lavalier mic I'm wearing is more than double that. So it just really depends on the type of environment that you're going to be recording in. Okay. Well, let's take a look at another type of microphone and when and why we would use that. So the next microphone is a shotgun microphone. Now this is great when you are, say, on scene. You don't really have the ability to connect a lavalier mic to the person. These are used a lot of times like on movie sets, and you'll see this if you've ever seen any behind the scenes shots. There's always this poor guy that's standing over in the corner with a really long pole and one of these microphones connected to the end of it. And he has to hold it up above his head and hold it above the actor's head out of the camera shot. So these are great for things like that where your actors or whomever, your voice talent is going to be moving around. So maybe if you are shooting something where the person has to interact with a piece of equipment, or maybe they're having to climb up and down and around this equipment, a lavalier mic certainly wouldn't help for that. Neither would a studio mic because it has to sit on a desk. So you could have someone holding the shotgun mic above them and record the sound. Now, it's called a shotgun mic because it actually kind of points in a single direction. So it's rather focused, and it depends on the particular brand that you get. But for the most part, it's kind of a focused recording device. It always has to be pointing at whomever is talking. So just be mindful of that, but you know, it's another possibility. Now, these microphones too can get rather expensive. And they don't generally have a direct input into a computer because, well, they're normally used out in the field. So you're using some other digital recording device. All right. Well, let's jump back in the studio here and let's talk about some of the accessories that you might need for something like the desktop or the studio microphone. So the first accessory I'm going to talk about here is a pop filter. So as I enunciate my P's and T's and other things like that, you know, just the mechanics of the human mouth making that sound of a P actually creates a little pop of air, and microphones will pick that up very quickly. So this kind of helps stop that. So you still hear the P's pronounced and enunciated properly, but it's not overdone. So a nice little pop filter. These just kind of mount right onto the microphone, and they just kind of stand between the person speaking and the microphone itself. The next one here is called a mic shield, and these things are awesome. Now here in the studio, we actually have foam on the walls to help kind of cut down on the sound and cut down on my voice bouncing around on the walls and other noises in here bouncing around on the walls, called reverberation. Well, especially for those of you who are working in an e-learning environment, you may not have the room or the ability to create a studio like what we have here. You may have to work in from your desktop or maybe in an office situation. You may have, of course, the slick walls there, but then you may also have windows and all of those things as you are maybe enunciating your script. You know, that sound is going to bounce off of those elements and hit the microphone again. So you're going to get this reverberation and you're going to have these kind of odd sounds. So this little mic shield here is going to prevent that from happening. So it puts the mic in kind of a closed environment and it's open just to the speaker. So it makes for a much better recording experience. They're not terribly expensive. And if you really are on a budget, I would suggest that you spend your money on the microphone, get a good quality mic. You don't have to go crazy with it, but get a good quality mic, spend your money here. And then if you really need one of these mic shields, you can certainly build it yourself. A nice cardboard box to fit around this, just cut the lid off of it, and then you can fill the box on the inside with some of the acoustic foam. Just glue it right in there and then set your microphone in the box and have the box open to your speaker, and it works great. It's kind of the same thing as this mic shield. All right, well, let's take a look at some of the other accessories that we have. So the microphone that I had on my desk here is a direct connection to my computer. And so it just uses USB. But occasionally you're going to find that you're going to get a mic. Maybe you already have a mic for other purposes, say a studio mic, that doesn't have a direct connection like that. It doesn't have a USB connection. So this next little bit here, you can kind of see this little layout here. It's got a laptop. There's the studio mic over there on the right on its stand. And this is another one from Blue Microphone. And these things are great. But if you'll notice that the cable that it's connecting to, it's a little bit different. That's not a USB cable. This is an XLR cable. And so what we have here is a USB converter. And you can see that right in front of the laptop. It's that small little white, kind of bluish white item. It's called an icicle. Now this is also from Blue. And what this thing does is convert the signal from the microphone and converts it over to USB. So it just plugs directly into your computer. Once again, you don't need a driver for this. It's typically plug and play. It will use whatever default audio driver is in place, and it works great. You have a single adjustment on there for the amplitude, so it's a little bit of a boost there. And so you can adjust that. And other than that, that's really all you need. It's simple plug and play. And it works with most any studio microphone. Now, the last thing we'll talk about here is a mic stand. Now, a lot of these mics will come with a simple desktop stand, but you may want something a little more elaborate. And so this one is just a large armature here. This particular one, you can see not only has the studio mic in place, but it also has that pop filter in place. So it just kind of clamps onto it and just positions itself there between the speaker and the mic. And this thing's kind of nice because, especially if you're having to use your desk for other purposes, you can pull this thing close and then push it out of your way. If you have different speakers that come in, they have different heights, of course, maybe. So you can adjust this very quickly and easily. So you'll see this a lot in radio broadcasts. Okay. So that is just a list of some of the more common elements that you're going to need. What exactly do you need? I would say definitely get a good headset, get a good microphone, and then after that it will depending on your microphone. You may need some additional stands, maybe the USB converter. It really depends. So there's lots of choices out there for any range of budget. So a quick stop over at Amazon.com gives you a plethora of choices there. All right. Well, there's a few more pieces that you may want. These are completely optional. And these are some pieces that we use here in this studio environment. So if you probably already have these in place if you have a studio. So let's just take a brief look at these, and then we're going to get into the actual process of using Adobe Audition to record. All right. So optional equipment here would include an audio mixer, which would allow you to have multiple sources for your audio, multiple microphones or what have you. Here in the studio, of course, you have my microphone. You have microphones from the cameras that we're using, which we've turned off, and that's one of the great things about this mixer. It allows me to mute those different channels. I also have audio coming from my computer that is pushing into this mixer. So it pulls it all together so that way you can hear me, hear the computer, and hear any other guest speakers that I may have. Next is a gate limiter and / compressors. Sometimes these are kind of put together. What this allows me to do is boost the audio signal, but more importantly, if I sneeze or make a really loud sound in here, that gate limiter will not allow it to go too high, so it's not going to blow out anyone's speakers or eardrums here. So these are great to have. A MIDI or musical instrument digital interface just allows me to connect traditional musical equipments like an organ or piano or a stringed instrument or anything like that. It allows me to plug those directly into this device and then record those or capture those maybe on my computer or perhaps even a digital tape, or in our case we used hard drives. So you can actually capture directly to solid state drives. And then lastly, the digital audio recorder. This thing is really, really handy if you are on location or you just don't have a lot of room for a whole pile of equipment. If you recall, back in the day we used to have, and I guess maybe some people still use them, small tape recorders. You're actually recording onto a really, really small cassette tape. Those were audio recorders. I remember using those in my college days to record lectures and things. Well, now we have the same type of thing, but instead of capturing to tape, which is more of an analog process, we are capturing directly to, say, a hard drive or a memory card. And so a digital audio recorder usually has built-in mics. You get different levels of these recorders depending on what your needs are, but a lot of times they'll have a built-in mic, but they'll also have microphone inputs. So if you wanted to maybe connect something like a lavalier mic to it, that way you can record in multiple locations or just where you don't have your computer. You can record to this device, then bring it back to your desktop here and connect it to your computer and pull the digital data off of it. All right. So now that we know the various pieces of equipment that we need, how do we set this stuff up? And the first thing I'm going to talk about is the microphone position. So this is really important if you're going to be doing narratives in your e-learning environment. Maybe you're going to do the narrative. Maybe you're going to have some voice talent come in. Now I'm using my lavalier mic here, so that's what you are hearing is from this mic. But for demonstration purposes here, I'm going to show you this microphone. This is a studio mic. And normally I would have maybe my filter in place. But the thing of it is here, you're going to set this in front of your talent here. And I would say between 18 and maybe 20, couple of inches is the distance. You don't want them right up on the microphone. That's going to be really bad. You're going to have a lot of, especially when you have your P's and things like that, they're going to strike this microphone and really make for a bad sound. So a nice little distance here. If you're too far away, now if I'm further back, now you're going to get kind of a tunnel effect. You're going to get a little more of an echo effect. So not so good. So a nice balance is right around about 18 to 20 couple of inches. Works really, really well. The microphone in this case actually collects all the way around, which is why I mentioned the little shield, which works great because basically it's cutting this microphone off from collecting sound from the backside. It's focusing it more this way. Actually, it's just focusing the sound, kind of tunneling it into one direction. So mic position. Really, really important. Now, this mic is sitting on this desktop, and while you can't hear it in this recording, if I'm working from this desk, this mic is fixed. It's a hard mount point, is what we'd call it. It's a hard mount. It does have a little bit of cushioning on the bottom, but if I were to bump my hands here on the desk or bump the desk while I'm recording, that's going to get recorded in this mic, and it's really, really loud. Even when you don't think you're bumping really hard, even though if you can't hear it, just the act of me kind of dropping my hands like that is going to get recorded in here, and it will be pretty loud. So if you're going to have something like this, the other thing, stay away. Keep your hands away from the table. Don't bump the table while you're recording. Other things you could do with this is take a large piece of foam. You can find acoustic foam or whatever, just any type of foam. Nice solid piece, put right underneath the mic, works great. It kind of helps buffer that vibration because that's what's happening. It's picking up that vibration. So there's that. The rest of the setup here as far as positioning content, the one thing I like about this particular mic is that I can monitor the sound in this mic. So if I'm the narrator, I can monitor my sound. Of course, in Audition, we'll actually see the meter moving, and that's great. But sometimes it's nice to be able to hear that. Well, with this one, I can actually plug into the bottom of it. There's a special slot here for the headset. So as I'm recording, I can listen to what is the mic picking up. And this is another reason for using a really good quality headset over the ears because it's going to kill all this ambient noise in the room, and I can really tell what exactly this mic is picking up. So a good quality headset, good microphone so you can monitor it, actually listen to it as a monitor rather than just seeing a little meter here on the screen. Both are important, but I really, really recommend this. Okay, so as far as setup goes there, The only other thing would be monitoring the volume. Most of these microphones have some sort of boost here. This one has this little volume button here, and I can just adjust that. On the back, it has a couple of more. It has a gain, and then I can also choose the pickup pattern. A little more than what we want to get into here because not all mics have this, but most of them will have a volume or a gain control that you can use, and that will adjust, you know, how sensitive this microphone is. So you will definitely want to adjust that and watch your meters. And we're going to see the meters over here in just a moment in Audition. You're going to watch those and make sure they don't go beyond what you want to record. Okay? So how does all this look inside of Adobe Audition? Well, let's take a look. I'm going to jump back into Audition, and for the purposes of here, I'm going to just open a sound, and I want to show you how to set up Audition for capturing on devices such as this blue microphone. Okay, so I'm back here in Audition, and once again, one of the more important things for me to have is this meter, this levels meter over here. Now, this is going to tell me what is the decibels, what is the amplitude that I'm recording, the volume, okay? And if it gets too high, if it reaches up here at the top at 0, well, anything beyond that, well, it's distorting. Generally, where I like to keep it is between 6 and 9, and that gives me a little bit of room to get a little bit louder like I'm doing right now and let it kind of peak up here. But generally speaking, at a normal tone of voice, it's probably around 9 is where I like to keep it. We can always adjust later if we need to boost it a little bit. But if it's too high, it starts to distort and you can't fix that. Okay, so what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to, even though you don't see this on screen, that's fine, not a big deal. I have a really long USB cable for this blue microphone, and I'm going to plug it into my computer while Adobe Audition is open. So Windows is going to identify it. It's going to load a driver. And then Audition says, hey, the list of audio devices connected to the operating system has changed. Do you want to open the audio hardware preferences? Well, I certainly do, because I have plugged in a new capture device. Now, it will do this anytime you add or remove a capture device or a listening device. So I don't have enough ports here on my computer right now. Otherwise, I'd plug in the headphone jack and you would see the same type of information here. It wants to know what is the setup. What device should I use in Audition to capture with? So I'm going to click yes. And basically, this is just opening up the preferences for Adobe Audition. This can also be found at the bottom of the Edit menu. So if you want to just do this manually, it's going to jump to the audio hardware section. And so right here, the default input, the default output. So right now, the default input is a desktop microphone, and this particular one is my little webcam. So it has a built-in mic, but that's not what I want to use. I click the drop-down, and then I can choose my microphone here. And look at this. There's my Yeti microphone right there. So I can choose that as my input device, okay? It's going to give me another little warning that it could modify my channel mappings. Is it stereo or is it mono? Input assignments and effect playback and or recording currently underway, which I don't have any. So it's a good idea to maybe do this before you start working with your audio files. So do I want to continue? Yes, I do. The default output, once again, this would normally be one of my speakers. Now, in my case, I actually have my headset connected directly to my microphone. So I'm going to choose speakers, Yeti stereo microphone here. And once again, I get another warning here. I'm going to tell that OK. All right. Here's my sample right here, and this a lot of times is going to be based on maybe the device itself. So I'm just going to leave that as is, and I'm going to tell this OK. So now I have set up, how Adobe Audition should capture sound, if that's what I want to do, and how it should play back that sound. And you know, like I said, it's going to depend on what your task is. If you're not capturing sound, then you're really just going to plug your headset directly into your computer, and if Audition happens to be running, it's going to pop up that message. Now, what if Audition wasn't running when I connected these devices? Well, then you're going to want to go to your Edit menu and go to Preferences. If you're on a Mac, you're going to go to the Audition menu and choose Preferences, and then locate those audio inputs there and your outputs and adjust accordingly. All right? So now that we have the equipment set up, well, what's next? Well, we could either start recording or we can start editing some sound. So let's take a look at that. So we've got a very similar setup that you see here. And so now we want to maybe import some audio. Adobe Audition is pretty amazing. It has a wide variety of audio file types that it can display and edit. Now, sometimes it may have to transfer these to another file type, especially once you start editing, but it can open and read all of these various file types here. It's pretty amazing. Some of these file types are what we would call compressed, so the very popular MP3, that is using some compression. So it's great for publishing, but maybe not so great when you're editing. We try to work with an uncompressed file when we can. Can't always do that, but when we can, we try to use an uncompressed. But when we publish, then compression is fine. All right, so these are all the various file types. How do we get these into Adobe Audition? So I'm going to jump back over to Audition very quickly. And here in my default layout here, now I did modify it ever so slightly. I moved my levels over here, but what I want to look for is a Files panel. Now, if you're ever kind of disoriented as to, well, where'd that panel go? Maybe you've grouped them, or maybe you changed the workspace and you can't find it, okay? If you go to the Window menu, this will list all of the panels, whether they're visible or not. The ones that have the check marks beside them, those items are currently visible on screen. The rest of them may be on screen, but they may be hidden behind one of the other panels, or they may be grouped with one of the other panels. So if you ever lose a panel, go to the Window menu. You can find it very, very quickly right here. Now, I know where my Files panel is. It is right over here on the left. And the Files panel, well, it manages all my various audio files. So this is where I will import audio files or open audio files. They're going to be collected here in this Files panel. A couple of different ways that you can work with this. If you want to import audio, so I just want to import an audio file, something that's already been captured. I'm not recording my microphone, I'm just going to import a sound. Okay? If I double click here in the middle of the Files panel, there's nothing here, but if I double click, Adobe Audition says, oh, you must want to open a file. So for our purposes here, I'm going to go to my Lessons folder. Now the lessons here will be available for you to download. It is a rather large file because there's some video in here as well. As you can see here, this says 842 megs. I've compressed it a little bit, but you'll be able to download these and follow along with this at your leisure. Okay? So I'm going to open the Lessons folder here. And to begin with, I'm just going to take a look at this voiceover work. Now this is recorded on a mic in a studio. So this is like the best possible scenario that you could have. And this is for a product we worked on called QMax. This is in a waveform, so this is should be uncompressed. But I'm going to open this file up. And we can see it listed over here in my Files panel. Okay. To the right, I have my Waveform Editor open, and so we can see the waveforms here. Okay. Across the top of my Waveform Editor is, well, it's kind of like a little timeline up here. It gives me the entire length of the waveform here. So this one's actually relatively long. It goes on for several minutes here, and we can see the whole thing up here at the top, and that's great. Because here in the main body of the Waveform Editor, I can zoom in so I can get a closer look at these waveforms. So to zoom in, if I just simply mouse over the waveform and I use my scroll wheel and I scroll up, what I'm doing is I'm zooming in. Now notice that the spikes, the amplitude, is not changing. It's not zooming in that way. It's zooming in more horizontally. So I'm zooming in, if you will, on the frequency or the timing of this. So I'm just zooming in here, and now I can see in more detail what the waveform is. And it goes pretty ridiculous here. I can keep scrolling, keep scrolling, keep scrolling, and I mean, you can really get down into these individual waveforms. And this is just, you know, a fraction of a second that I'm looking at here. So to zoom out, I'm just going to use the scroll wheel. Once again, I'm just got my cursor here on this Waveform Editor panel, and I'm just scrolling out. Okay. Now, if I scroll out a little bit further here, and then I look at that little timeline up there at the top, notice that there is a little small section here that has been highlighted. Okay? This is what is currently being displayed here in the main panel. Now, if I mouse over the center of that little highlight area here in my timeline, I can click and hold, and I can drag that to the left. I'm going to do it relatively slow here so we can actually see the waveform moving. Okay? So I'm just previewing maybe a different point in time of this recording. Okay? So I can move these back and forth, travel through this. Okay? I can also zoom using this little blue box up here. If I mouse over the right edge of that little blue box or the left edge, it'll actually allow me to zoom out if I make the box wider, or zoom in if I make the box narrower. Pretty cool. So this allows me to zoom in on a particular section and then move around, jump around my audio track. And this is extremely handy when we have longer recordings that we want to work with. To the right of this Waveform Editor, of course, I have a little infinity symbol here right in the center, and that means there's no noise. And then it goes up and then it goes down. So these are the amplitude. The higher these spikes, the louder the sound. And you'll note that most of these kind of top out just before this -6. So these are all on average around, well, probably around 12, between 12 and 18. So the sound on this is probably just about right. So what I want to do is let's just preview this a little bit. So I'm gonna move this preview section all the way here to the very beginning. Here at the very beginning, we're previewing the first of our audio file. Now I can actually see my playhead. It's here at the top of the waveform, just below the timeline. And this little guy, this little blue handle here, allows me to drag through. And as I drag through, you may not be hearing anything, but I can see that meter over there jumping. So I know there's sound being played. I'm just going to drag this meter back. Okay? And I want to play this sound. Now, you do have a transport panel down here in the lower left. And this is kind of like your standard play, pause, stop, fast forward type of controls. So I can hit the play button there, and it's going to play this sound. Okay? Okay? So in my case, I'm not hearing it because it's going to my headsets. And so that means you can't hear it. So for right now, I'm going to pause this. So I'm going to hit the pause button, and let's let you experience this sound. So what I need to do is unplug my microphone. So I'm going to do that for right now. We're going to see that this thing is going to hopefully give me some kind of little warning here that things have changed. So I'm going to say yes, I'm going to look at this. And so now it's still set to the default input of the Yeti. I'm going to say no input on this case, tell it okay. The default output here. This hopefully is going to be one of these two. I have two outputs set up here. So I'm going to try the Realtek here. Tell it okay and okay. And then if I play this, if we're not getting anything, then it maybe is the other output. Not a big deal. Just go back over here. Because I am not connecting or disconnecting, I have to go to the Edit menu and down to Preferences and Audio Hardware so that I can see, what is the input, what is the output. Let's take a look at this. All right, so let's try this one.
Increased to 2 inches using highly
and so
conductive
now
aluminum.
we're getting the sound.
QMax FTS
So
delivery.
once again, it depends on the devices that you have connected. You just want to pay attention to what's going on. You can always go over there and modify that and play it back. But now that we have sound, you should be able to hear it. And what I'm going to do is just move the playhead back. So I want to restart the play. I can grab the playhead here and just drag it back. And now as I scrub through it, you can actually hear the gibberish here. Okay, so that's kind of cool. Kind of a scrubbing sound. Okay.
4A, QMax FTS Deep Dive.
Now, this is what I want you to know. I'm going to zoom in on this real quick. Okay. The sound that we're looking at here right now, see how this goes flatline? That means complete silence. So that tells me that this narrator was in a studio environment. They had the best possible setup that they could get. And now it's giving me really good quality, means I have a lot less work to do here inside of Adobe Audition. So where she's pausing, my narrator is pausing, I'm getting really just a flat line. There's no background noise. Okay, so that's pretty cool. All right. So this particular piece is a narrative for, like I said, kind of an e-learning piece. It's a little more of a promotional piece, but this is a narrative that we want to work with here. Okay. So importing these sounds and just taking a look at how those are displayed here inside of Audition. Now, I showed you earlier another type of display, the spectral frequency display. Now, how do I see that? Because maybe I'm interested in that as well. Well, right up here at the top, I still am going to use this Waveform Editor because I'm editing a single sound, okay? But right up here at the top, right below my menu bar, okay? So I'm working in the waveform, and I am currently viewing just the standard waveform, but there is this thing that says Show Spectral Frequency Display. So if I click on this, it's going to kind of split the screen. So it took the waveform and kind of crushed it up here near the top, and now here's that spectral frequency display. Pretty cool. So I can see both at the same time. There's a little dividing line here because it's all in the same panel. So I can mouse over this dividing line and I can give a little more room to my waveform or a little more room to my spectral frequency. You can even push this all the way to the top and just see the spectral frequency display if you'd like. To switch it, all you have to do is just click and drag, or if I double click on the little dividing line, basically it took it and pushed it all the way to the bottom of the screen. So you don't necessarily need the little icon up there at the top. It's great, but you can also just double click on this little textured area here, this little dividing line here at the very bottom. Double click, it pops open, it jumps to the top, double click, it closes. Pretty easy. Great way to display your audio. Okay. So you would continue this process of importing sounds, and that's really all I'm doing here is I'm importing existing captures. So this could have been maybe my narrator is not here locally. They have their own recording, and that's what this situation is. I had an outside source. They recorded the sound. They sent me the audio files, and I've opened them here. Now, you could also capture audio using the microphone. It's a very similar process, but you create a new file here, and down there in the transport controls, there's a record button, and you could actually record your microphone. And it would capture that file, save it, and it creates it, well, there on your desktop or wherever it is you point it. It actually is creating a digital audio file. So, working with the files. You can have many files open, working on multiple files at the same time, mix and match them in between, all kinds of great stuff with importing audio, different ways to import it. I won't get into it here, but there's also a way to import audio from a CD, so you can actually extract it from a CD. I'm not going to get into that because there's a lot of legal things that go around with that. So if you're importing audio from a traditional music CD from a recording artist, then you obviously have to get permission from that. So we're not going to go into that here, but just know that it can be done. All right. Well, let's take a look at, now that we have this audio file inside of Audition, some of the basic edits that we can create. So here we have our audio files imported. In my case, I'm using just one here. We'll import some more as we go along. But what are some of the basic audio edits that would be commonplace? What are some of the things that we need to be able to do? Okay. So I'm going to show you how to select a section of audio, maybe just one piece. Okay. How do we do that? Common commands like cut, copy, and paste. So if you need to rearrange or remove elements or maybe duplicate elements, the cut, copy, and paste commands. Works a lot like cut, copy, and paste within a word processing app. It's very, very simple. It's great. Trimming our audio. We're going to trim for time here. I'll show you how to adjust the volume. This particular piece was a little bit low, so maybe I want to increase its amplitude. And then, of course, I may want to add a fade in and a fade out. Typically, we do this on maybe music, but hey, in a narrative track, we could do it as well. And then finally, I want to show you how to create just pure silence. I want to keep the same amount of time for my audio file, but maybe in a particular section, maybe this person coughs or does something like that, and I just want to quiet that. How do I create silence? So I'm going to jump back over to Audition, and I'm going to use the same little QMax Final file that I have here, and I'm going to zoom out on it a little bit, and I'm going to mouse here to the very beginning. And so let's just take a listen at the opening sound here.
4A, QMax FTS Deep Dive.
So that was just a marker here to let us know that this particular section for this particular piece is called 4A. Okay? So I don't really want that. Okay? Well, let's keep listening here.
QMax FTS is made from aluminum and fits over common tubing. This makes field installation quick and simple. QMax FTS transforms the nature of a steam tracer from ineffective convective heat transfer to highly efficient conductive heat transfer, while the heating surface area is increased to 2 inches using highly conductive aluminum. QMax FTS delivers fewer leaks, predictable results, and easy installation. This reduces capital costs and long-term maintenance costs. 4B.
Okay, so now we can see that here we have a long pause, a little skinny line here indicates no sound, and then we start getting spikes again, so the narrator starts speaking again. So I want to select just this opening bit. I don't need the rest of this. Once again, I'm going to go up here to the top, and I can see my entire timeline. I can kind of see what is it that I'm previewing currently. I'm going to move that to the left a little bit so I can get back to the beginning of this particular track. Okay, and then I'm going ahead and extend this preview area. So I'm going to grab the left-hand side, drag it back to the left, and now I'm seeing the very beginning and right here where the sound picks up again. So this goes on to the next section. So what I want to capture is just this section here in the middle. And maybe I don't really need her opening comment, 4A or whatever it is, but I'll go ahead and capture it anyway. So I'm going to just mouse my cursor right over the spot here where she goes silent. I'm going to click, hold, and drag. And so it's starting to highlight this waveform. Now there at the bottom I have a big time counter. So it's telling me how much time this actually is taking up, how much time I'm capturing here. Okay? So I've got this piece here. What can I do with it? Well, one of the first things would be to either cut, copy, or even paste. So this works pretty much like it does in any other, like a word processing tool. I'm going to go up to the Edit menu. Okay. From here, you can see I have cut, which would remove it from this particular track, but it keeps it in memory, so I could maybe paste it somewhere else. I could copy it, which would leave it here in this one and still copy it to memory, and then I could paste it somewhere else. Or my favorite feature here is that I want to separate this longer audio file into smaller segments that I can work with in my e-learning application. That's copy to new. So it's going to take this file, or at least this part of it, and copy it into a new document. So that's what I'm going to choose, copy to new. Okay? So now I'm seeing, or displaying here, showing just that one little section here.
4A, QMax FTS Deep Dive.
Okay.
QMax FTS.
All right, so I'm not going to force you to listen to all of that, but that is what we have, just a small segment. Now, look over here in the Files panel. We have a new file, Untitled 1. So here is where I can save this file. All right. I'm going to go up to my File menu, and I'm going to choose Save. Okay. So it's wanting to save it as a WAV file, which is what I typically work with, and I'll give it a name. So I'm going to cancel this real quick because I think this was 4A, but I want to make sure.
4A.
Yep, sure is. So when I save this, I'm going to call it 4A. And for my purposes here, that's all I really need because I'm going to have a 4A, B, C, I might have a 5A, that sort of thing. So that's really all I need. Now, where do I put it? All right. So I'm going to click this Browse button to the right. I'm going to navigate to my folder where I want to place it. So I'm going to go to my desktop, my lessons, but this would be normally my project folder where I'm going to put all these different pieces, and then I will access them in my e-learning tool. So this is my project folder. I'm just going to save it right here. Once again, the format. I'm going to leave it as a WAV file, but if I wanted to, I could choose any of these file formats here. There's quite a few of them there. Personally, I like working with the WAV because it's uncompressed, so I'm not losing any data, so I'm going to leave it as that right now. The sample type and the format settings, those are already set for me. You can change them. I generally don't. I leave them as whatever the native was for this file, and then I just tell it OK. So now I have a completely separate file that I can work with this small segment. So a copy and a paste into new basically is what I've done. Now other ways you could use this is maybe you want your person here, your narrative track, to repeat themselves. Okay, so you could copy a small segment. You could either cut it or copy it and then click in another section and paste it inside of it if you so choose. Just be mindful that you could be changing the timing of the overall narrative track. And if you want to be careful not to do that, just be careful of what you're pasting. If you cut, say, 2.5 seconds, make sure that you paste back in 2.5 seconds. That way the overall time is still the same. All right, so cutting, copying, and pasting. So hopefully that's going to give you a little jumpstart into some very basic editing. In this case, I have a really long narrative track, and it has multiple pieces inside of it. Now, why would someone choose to do that? Well, you know, there's different reasons, but one reason is continuity. So as a voice talent myself, when I have to record sound like that, I'd rather have the script and have all of the script in front of me and record in one longer session. That way I get the same continuity in my voice, the same inflection, because when I'm recording, I am in a particular mood or in the zone, if you will. And if I do this at different points during the day, I record a little bit, stop, record another bit, stop. The inflections may be different, the mood may be different. But if I do it at a longer segment, it should be relatively consistent. So that's one reason. Now, what I wanted to do here was take that longer track and just cut it into pieces. And so that's what I did. Okay? So copying, cutting, and pasting. Pretty simple stuff. All right, well, what's the next basic element that we want to do? How about some trimming? When I cut and or copied this into a new file, I copied that first little intro piece where the narrator tells me this is 4A such and such. Now that is not going to be in the final piece. So I want to trim that out. How do we do that? Let's take a look. So here in, back here in Audition, I've got this first little piece here. I'm gonna highlight it, and if I hit the play button right now, it's gonna play through this and just keep going. But there's a neat little feature here that I can turn on, and I really like this because it helps me identify sounds. What I'm gonna do is go down here to my transport controls. This is all your play, pause, stop, that sort of thing. But there's this little guy right here. It's a little arrow kind of going around in a box. It's a loop, okay? If I turn that on, okay, it goes green, and now if I hit the play button, my playhead in the timeline up here is right up here in this highlighted section. So I'm gonna hit the space bar, and that's the default keyboard shortcut for play.
4A, QMax FTS Deep Dive. 4A, QMax FTS Deep Dive.
So you can see it's just repeating. It's looping that sound. Okay, cool. Now, I can adjust the amount of time that I have selected here. So I don't have to, reselect. Up here at the top in my little timeline bar here, my section that I have highlighted has these little brackets on it. And those brackets, if I mouse over them, I can extend my selection or shrink it down. So I'm going to shrink it down a little bit tighter here because I want as much silence here in front of this for this purpose. And I'm going to go ahead and extend this out. Okay? So this piece I don't really need. Now I could do one of two things. I could go right up here to edit, and I could choose the cut command. Okay? I could also choose the delete command. So they're going to do similar effects. Now I'm going to choose delete. Okay? It has changed my time here. Okay? It actually physically removed that amount of time, and that's fine for this particular piece. If I undo that, I can go to edit, undo, and then I were to go edit and cut, you see it does basically the same thing. So a delete, a cut, very similar. With the cut command though, that particular piece of audio is in memory, and so maybe I could put that here at the tail. If I move my playhead out here to the end of this timeline, and I go edit and paste, you see it puts that little bit of audio, that piece I had selected, and puts it here on the end. So trimming is really just a matter of cutting off the head or the tail, basically. And it's very, very easy to do. In this case, I've just trimmed it off and put it at the tail. So I'm going to delete that once again so I have just the audio that I want. Okay. Now, what else do we want to do here? Maybe we want to adjust the volume here, the amplitude. Okay. In this case, it's really not too bad. The spikes are, around -6, but I think I'm going to push them a little bit. I want those to go up maybe to about -3. That might be making it a little too loud here, but just so you can see how this works. If I have nothing selected, okay, nothing is highlighted here, and I increase the amplitude, I'm going to do that right here. There's this little floating window right here, this little tiny little guy right here. I can move him around and get him out of my way. So if he's, if you have, maybe you zoomed in and the spikes are a little taller here and it's in the way, you can move it. You can grab this little left edge and move it around. But there's a little dial here, and it allows you to adjust the amplitude. So if I click and hold on this little dial and I drag to the right, you can see it's getting louder and louder. If I drag to the left, it's getting smaller and smaller or quieter and quieter. Okay? Okay. When I release, you see the entire audio piece is selected. It's all highlighted in white because it assumes I wanted to apply this to the entire audio track. Now, I really didn't want to do that, so how do I change this? I mean, can I just come back over here and drag this back up? Well, you could, but your best bet is to go to the Edit menu and choose Undo. And you can see it's an Undo Amplify. Okay? So if you wanted to adjust the entire track, don't select anything. If I only want to affect a particular section, let's say, here's a little section that's kind of quiet. Now, I can't just randomly select a piece here. You probably want to zoom in, and so you can see a nice little break. Maybe we're at flat lines here. Maybe this little section, and I'm just going to play it back real quick.
Div heat transfer, div heat transfer, div heat transfer, div heat transfer, div heat.
So maybe I want this to be a little bit louder. I've selected just this section. I've tried to catch it on these little flat spots so we're not going to see or hear, in this case, her voice jump too much. Now, a minor adjustment here is going to be a big impact. So I'm just going to do a small adjustment here. I'm going to just drag it to the right, and you can actually see those waveforms growing. Now, do I want them to be the same height as this previous little piece? I don't know, maybe, but usually you don't have to go quite as high. So adjusting the amplitude or the volume. Just one way to do it. You can do it as a whole or just as a small section. Okay, so let's give that a listen.
Transfer, div heat transfer, div heat transfer, div heat transfer, div heat transfer.
Much, much louder. Now, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, and I'm going to click maybe back here to reset the playhead, and we'll give it a listen.
To highly efficient conductive heat transfer. Qmax FDS is...
So you can see that one section got considerably louder. So you want to be careful of that. Typically, we only do this in sections where maybe the narrator stepped away from the mic a little bit, maybe they backed up a little bit, or maybe they just, you know, a lot of times maybe trying to read the script or whatever. So you can pick individual sections and adjust the volume or the amplitude. Otherwise, if you have no selection, it's going to magnify or increase the amplitude of the whole audio track. So really up to you, adjusting the audio. And that's just one quick way to do it. There are other filters and things that we'll see a little later on that can do similar things. All right. Well, one last basic edit that we need to create, and that is going to be creating a fade in and fade out, and then also just creating an area of silence. Okay, so let's take a look at fading our audio in and out, and then also creating silence. So I'm going to continue using this same file that we've been editing thus far. I am going to just adjust the fade in. So as this person starts talking here, we'll just listen very briefly.
Qmax FDS is made from aluminum and...
Okay. Now normally I probably wouldn't fade this in. Maybe if I wanted to simulate just a conversation and I just wanted to fade the volume up and then maybe fade the volume out. Maybe I'm just using it as ambient noise. It's great for that. Music is another way that we can do this, and another common use for a fade in and fade out. Really simple. Instead of selecting a particular section and saying, hey, reduce the volume here, Adobe Audition gives you a tool for this, and it's just a little symbol here. I'm going to move my amplitude adjustment here out of the way. And this little guy right here in the upper left-hand corner, this little guy controls my fade in. And what you do is you click and drag it. So if I click and drag it to the right, you can see this yellow line. And as this yellow line starts to get close to my waveform, look at my waveform shrinking there. And the further I go, the further it shrinks. Okay, that's pretty neat. So I'm going to release this, and let's see what happens here. Let's take a listen.
Qmax FDS is made from aluminum and fits over common tubing. This makes field installation quick.
So as you can see, it's very quiet at the beginning, and then it slowly starts to get louder and louder. Unfortunately, I can't adjust that again. If I try to drag this again, guess what? It's going to make it even quieter. It's going to run that same adjustment again.
Qmax FDS is made from aluminum and fits over common tubing. This makes field installation...
Okay, so if you don't like what you're getting the first time around, simply go to the Edit menu, undo your fade, and then go to the Edit menu again, because I applied it twice, and undo it again. Now I'm back to the beginning, okay? Back to where I was, same volume here. Now, if I scroll to the end of the track here, I have the same thing here on the end. This is a fade out. So like I said, these are really powerful when we're using music. So let me just import a music file. I'll go to the File menu, and I'll choose Open. I can also choose the command Import and File, and there's a keyboard shortcut for that as well. So maybe it's not a standard audio file, maybe it's one of the other odd ones. You can always try this import command, and this will look for all supported media. So I'm going to go to my lessons folder here, and I have a background music track here. So like I said, we normally use this in music. So I'm going to open this up. And it opens over here in my files panel, but what I'm seeing over here is still the narrative track. Okay, so if I give that a listen.
Area is increased to 2 inches.
Okay, so just by importing the file doesn't mean it's going to open it here in the waveform. Now I have a couple of different ways to select that file. One is to go up here to the Editor tab. Okay, this little Editor tab, the top of the Editor window, tells me which file I'm working with. Okay, the little asterisk indicates that there are changes made to this file that I have not saved yet. To the right of that is a little menu. If I click that menu, you can see here are the other files that are listed in the Files panel. So I could go directly to my Obvious Solution MP3 file. This is that music track. Another way to do this is to simply come over to the Files panel, double-click on the file that you want to work with to load it. Okay? So the narrative track was, really this was a single channel, but the Obvious Solution MP3 here, this is the music track, this is 2 channel, a left and right channel here. And so in here, just give this a listen. So this arrangement, you can see, you can look at the amplitude here and you can see that it's relatively quiet, and then it starts to get a little louder. See, the spikes get a little louder as they get out here. So they get a little taller, so they're a little bit louder. Okay, so here is where the fade in and fade out work really well. Now, because this is 2 channels, left and right channel, when I grab this little guy, it's going to do both, and even though it looks like it's kind of bridging across both, it's going to do still a linear fade. Okay, so I might do something like this. Now, I say linear. Okay, I'm keeping a constant rate of adjustment here. It's slowly fading up. Okay, if while I'm dragging this item, if I drag to the right and then I drag down at the same time, you see I'm applying a curve to it. So now it's going to start really, really quiet, and then it's going to ramp up really quickly into its full volume. So keeping the cursor up here is more of a slow, steady progression. If I drag down, it's a little more rapid progression. I can also drag up, and it curves the other way. So it's even slower, so it ramps up pretty quick. Okay? So I'm just going to create a simple fade here. I'm going to do, let's say about 10 seconds in. Okay? I'm just looking at the little ruler up there at the top where my cursor is and see where it is. I'm going to keep my linear value at 0. And now, when we play this back, a nice slow fade in over 10 seconds. Now, by the time it gets to 10 seconds, it's going to be full volume. All right. Now, one of the other things I was seeing here, and that's why I stopped it, was that the meters over here on the right were starting to peak at red. So normally your meters are green, you're good. Even yellow, you're pretty good. But when they start hitting red over here, now you've got a problem. So that is the overall amplitude. It's really, really starting to spike up here. So what I'm going to do is, I don't have anything selected. I'm going to grab my little amplitude adjustment here, and I'm going to just drag it down a little bit. And I'm actually going to just drag this down to where these are about, well, I'm going to do about a -9 on these. And that way it's going to make the whole thing a little bit quieter. You could do this perhaps in your e-learning tool. Depending on what tool you're working with, you can import this audio file and lay it in the track with maybe a narrative or maybe whatever else it is you have going on in there. And you can reduce the volume there. Once again, it depends on the e-learning tool that you're working with, but you do have some basic controls like that. But it's also nice to be able to do that ahead of time here in a tool like Adobe Audition. Okay, so a fade in, a fade out, changing the amplitude. What about just dead silence? Maybe you have a spot here where you just want just silence. Let's take a look. So I'm going to jump back over here to my little narrative track. and maybe there's just a spot here where this person is saying something right here, and really maybe we just want to edit that out for whatever reason, okay? So what I do is I just kind of pick the section that I want to be dead silent. Now, I could handle this maybe with maybe just taking the adjustment right here, my amplitude adjustment, and just crank that all the way to the left. And that pretty much just kills that audio. I got a nice flat line here. And that works really well. It does the job, it does it very quickly, and it's just a permanent change there. And so that's one way to do it. It's very quick, very easy. If you do have some background noise, maybe a little bit of atmosphere, you're going to have to go about that a slightly different way. Okay? So let's take a look at another file here. I'm going to actually undo this. Okay? So amplify, certainly just crank it to the left, crank it all the way down. That will kill all the noise in that area. But this one, like I said, it's really clean sound back here. There's really no noise going on, or very, very little noise at all, because it's a studio environment. Let's take a look at something that was shot on location. Let's see, I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to choose Open. And here, I'm going to choose this one. I've already extracted these for you. And let's just choose this. And let's just take a listen here.
This one I want you to have fun with.
All right.
Really want to have fun. Just have it class.
All right, you got it.
Slate it.
All right.
So there's a little banter back and forth. They're getting ready to shoot a shot here. This was shot on the camera, recorded on the camera, and I've just extracted the audio.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now? How much in lost downtime would it save you if we could reduce that number, say, by half?
Okay, so let's say I wanted to remove a section of this. I'm gonna zoom in here, and let's say I want to remove this little bit right here. Now, if I just use the same process, if I use that adjust amplitude and just crank that all the way to the left, I may run into an issue. And the issue is right here. It's very difficult to see right now because of my zoom percentage. So what I want to do is I'm going to come and go over here to the far right here, and I'm working in the left channel. But if I mouse over here and I use my scroll bar, I'm scrolling up, it's zooming in on the amplitude itself. So now I can see, well, wait a minute, there are little spikes in there. Even though my narrator is not speaking, this is that ambient noise in the background. So if I play this, you can barely hear it, but there is, I can see over here in the meters, there is a little bit of ambient noise here. Now, in some cases, you would want to remove that, but in this case, maybe I don't. So instead of actually just flattening these sounds, I would copy and paste this over it. So that's exactly what I'm going to do here. I'm going to copy this. I'll say Edit and Copy. And then I can maybe click right here. Now, if I just paste right now, Edit and Paste, you see it actually added it. It just moved the sound that was there, just moved it down and just inserted this right in the middle. So that would extend the time. That's not really what I want to do. I actually want to replace some sound. So I'll just click on this, drag through it to select it, and then I can replace it. Now, I still have adjusted the time a little bit, so you have to play around with that a little bit, but you know, I can put this in here, maybe insert another one here. And now I've got roughly the same amount of time, but I've just got a longer pause in between. And I'm keeping that ambient noise.
Hi,
There we go. So just a couple of different ways to create silence. Like I said, if you just need that dead silence, you have a nice studio recording, you could perhaps use just the amplify adjustment and just crank it all the way down. Otherwise, find a nice quiet piece in your audio track that has just the ambient noise, capture that, and then paste it where you need to have just silence. That way it's not complete silence, it's still nice and a little bit of ambience, and it still sounds the same. If we don't have that ambient noise in the background, if it just abruptly just drops off to nothingness, it does sound a little funny. So just a couple different tools for that. Well, that's the basic editing here that we have. And for now, we're going to take a short break, give you a little time here to take that in. And when we come back, we're going to do some more edits. We're going to get into a little bit more of Audition here. We're going to spend the rest of the time in Audition and making some additional edits, maybe something a little more intricate here. We're going to clean up some audio, use some filters, and then we're going to show you how to publish this content as well. Welcome back to the show, everyone. My name is William Everhart, and we are right smack in the middle of editing audio with Adobe Audition. Now, in the first half, we saw how we can import the files. We saw how we can make some minor edits, some cut, copy, paste, adjusting volume, simple things like that, just some day-to-day tasks. We also took a look at some of our audio equipment that we'll be using for the recording and/or editing process. And so now we want to move on to the next step. Once we get some of these basic edits out of the way, or maybe we just need to go beyond the basics, what do we need to do now? So in this section, we want to talk about some of those a little more in-depth edits that you have to make, and then eventually, how do we publish this content? So let's dive back into our lesson here and take a look at what we're going to do in the next section. So as I said, we mentioned all the basic audio edits here, and now it's time to move on to actually cleaning up our audio, something a little more than just trimming or cutting little bits and pieces. So in this particular section, we want to take a look at cleaning up the audio. We want to create what is known as a noise profile. And this is really handy in environments where we have some ambient noise. We want to identify that and be able to remove it. So we first have to identify that, and that is called a noise profile. Then we will clean up our audio using that profile. And then maybe beyond that, if we have a single sound that's in the background, how do we identify that and how do we remove that sort of thing? So that's what we're going to do here. Let's jump back over to Adobe Audition. And I want to just show you very quickly one more just simple task with working with Audition. And that is maybe closing your files. So I have several files over here that I have opened in the past. And you can see these over here in the Files panel. Now, all of the ones that have little asterisks beside them, that means that there is an unsaved change. So I made some sort of edit to these files, and I have not saved them as yet. So as I close these files, well, then Audition's going to ask me, well, would you like to save those changes? Now, over here to the right, I am editing the last sound that we were working on, and that was the remove background noise WAV file. And it has one of those little asterisks on it. So to close this file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right there to that menu for the Waveform Editor for this file. If I click on that little menu, I have these different commands, and you can see all of the little files here that are listed. So if I were to choose close, it's going to close this file that I'm currently editing, which is denoted by this little blue circle here. So I'll click close, and once again, there was a change here that was not saved. So it's going to allow me to save it or not. Now I'm going to choose no in this case. And then it will simply display the next available file. So I'm going to go over here to the Files panel this time. Now this is kind of interesting, and it throws people the first time you see it. If I select a file here in the Files panel, I have a file highlighted. This is the 4A wave. And up at the top here, I've got some different options here. So I can create folders and I can move elements and things like that. But then there's this little trash can. And normally when we see a trash can icon, that relates to deleting a file. Well, not in this case, not in the Files panel. That is essentially closing this file. So once again, an unsaved change. Do I want to save that or not before I close this? So I'll choose no on that one. And so now I can go ahead and do this with the rest of them. Now, if you have a lot of files, a lot of audio files that you've been working with, You can select multiples here in the Files panel and hit the little trash can. Once again, it doesn't trash them, it doesn't delete them, it simply closes them. So you can do that there, or if you're working over here in the Waveform Editor. One of the really interesting things about the Adobe tools is these panels, this concept of the panels here. And really, really unique to the audio and video tools is the fact that if I mouse over a particular panel and I tap the tilde key, the little squiggly line beside the number 1 at the top of your keyboard, it actually puts the focus of that screen entirely on that particular panel. So notice how my waveform panel has just expanded to take over the entire screen. So you might work in this mode so that you're not distracted by some of the other panels. Now, oops, I'm in this mode. How do I get to that Files panel so I can close this file? Well, that's the really neat thing, is that you don't have to. I'm going to go right back up here to the top of the Editor panel, right here where the Editor tab is. I'm going to click on the little drop-down menu. And we saw that we could close a single file, but here, close all. So it's going to close all of these files. If anything needs to be saved, it's going to allow me to do that. I'm going to choose no to all in this case to just dismiss them. Okay. So now that all my files are closed, I'm still in this widescreen mode here. How do I get back out of it? Well, just make sure that your cursor is in that particular panel and hit the tilde key again. And it jumps back to your working workspace, the current workspace. So really, really cool. I love that. Just mouse over a section, hit the tilde key, that particular panel becomes full screen. Love it. It's awesome. So now I'm focused on the Files panel. And I want to open a file so we can create a noise profile. So I can just double click anywhere in this Files panel and that will open this file. So I'm going to choose this Remove Background Noises. Now once again, this is going to be in the Lessons folder that you can download. And I'm just going to open this, and this was captured from a camera. Okay, so it's been extracted from the video portion. We're going to do a little bit with Premiere in just a moment and show you how that kind of works. But for now, I've just imported it. So I'm going to hit my tilde key again, and now I can actually see it over there in the Waveform Editor. So when we listen to this, we can hear this first little bit where the cameraman and the actor in this case were kind of going back and forth. And so we really don't want this piece. So I just want to trim that particular section out. I can highlight this and cut it out. Okay? So I can just highlight it and I can delete it. Okay? Now what I really want is to find what is this background noise here. So when this goes flat, when these little spikes go flat, that should be almost dead silent. So I'm going to just kind of click on this little spot right here and I'm going to zoom in on it. Now that makes it a little bit wider so I can see that, but it still kind of looks like a flat line. So I'm going to mouse over here to the right. Now remember, over here on the right, this little meter, these little measurements over here is for the amplitude. So if I just have my cursor in that area and I scroll up with the mouse wheel, it's just magnifying the amplitude. Now it's not actually adjusting the volume. It's not adjusting the amplitude. It's just zooming in on the amplitude so I can see more detail. So a spot like this is a pause between, two bits of audio here. But how much is it a pause and how much is it where the voice is just kind of tapering off? Well, sometimes you can see that. I mean, I can see here, this is a little bit louder, so this is probably the end of his statement. And then somewhere right in here, this is just background noise. And then here I can start to see it ramp up again. And this is perhaps where my actor in this case is inhaling, taking a breath. And so the microphone is actually picking that up. So this might not be the best spot to capture a noise print. What I'm looking for is a spot during the recording that no one's talking, nothing's happening, and we're just getting the ambient room noise. Okay? So I'm going to zoom back out here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come up here and I'm going to drag this little bar at the very top. And I can see over here on the end, towards the end of the recording, my actor has stopped talking and everybody's just quiet for a moment and we're just recording some, silence, some room silence here. So let's zoom in over there and let's take a listen. So I'm going to just move my playhead here towards the end where the actor is saying his closing bits. Oops. Still had that other section selected, so that's not going to work. What I have to do is just kind of, anytime I have a selection like this, it's going to jump back to that point. So all I have to do is just click anywhere in the waveform, and that will remove that selection. Okay. Now I can move my shuttle here at the top all the way towards the end, and then I'm just going to click up here near the top to move the playhead to this position. Okay. And now I'll hit the space bar to start playing.
Reliable and energy efficient. That was
okay, so right in here, it's a good noise print. Now, in this particular case, Audition would like for anything less than 5 seconds. Up to 5 seconds, it will capture. Anything beyond that, it's not going to capture that. And I've got maybe a second and a half here that I can work with, a second and a half, and that's pretty good. The more you can capture, the better, the more accurate it's going to be. So I'm going to just look at my waveforms here, and I'm going to play this back. Once again, I have it in the loop mode. So I'm going to play this back. And that looks pretty good. I can look at the meters over here and I can see they're not bouncing a whole lot. They're staying pretty consistent. And if I had my headphones on, I'd really listen to that and make sure, yep, he's not inhaling, he's not, there's no other noises going on. It's just the ambient room noise. Okay, so this is going to be like a fingerprint, okay? So I've targeted an area that should be quiet. It should be silence, if you will. And I've targeted this as noise. So I'm telling Audition that this is noise. It's like capturing a fingerprint. It's going to identify just ambient room noise. And so I'll be able to take that and then apply it to a filter here that will look through the audio file for this exact same noise print, kind of like a fingerprint. It's going to look for those same variances in frequency and amplitude, and then it's going to remove them automatically for me. So let's take a look. Let's capture this noise print, and then let's apply it using a filter and filter out that background noise. So now that I have this captured, I've got this selection. How do we capture it? Okay, a couple ways to do it. My favorite method is to simply right mouse click. When in doubt, right mouse click. That's one of my mantras and it works great here. When you right mouse click on an object in most every piece of software, you get what we call a contextual menu. Basically, it is a filtered menu that says, okay, based on your selection or where your cursor is, this is what you can do. So I don't have to pore through all the various menus and all that kind of commands to find what I'm looking for. This is going to tell me what things are available to me. And one of those things is the ability to capture a noise print. So it's going to take a fingerprint here. Okay? It's going to tell me that the current audio selection will be captured and loaded as a noise print for use the next time the noise reduction effect is launched. Now, it's going to do this every time, and one of the great things about the Adobe products is, one, they do give you all these warnings, kind of let you know what's about to happen, but they also give you the ability to not show it again. So normally I would turn this off. I would check that so that it does not alert me again, because I know what it's doing. So normally I would check that. In this case, I'm not, because this is a machine we use for other demo purposes. So I'm going to just tell that OK to dismiss that, and that noise has been captured as a noise print. So how do we use these noise prints? OK, well first I need to deselect this. You see I have that range of white there, so I need to deselect that. To do so, I'm simply going to just click anywhere on my waveform. It will collapse that selection and it moves the playhead to wherever I clicked. Next, I want to zoom out so I can see the entire waveform here from start to finish. And so what I like to use is a keyboard shortcut. That keyboard shortcut is the / key. You will find that on a standard keyboard just above the return key or enter key on your keyboard, just below the backspace key. So it's a / key. All right, so that is just a shortcut to zoom out so I can see the entire waveform here. Pretty cool. Now it doesn't change the view of the amplitude, so I'm still zoomed in there, so I can still see that yes, that is a background noise. There is something going on there. Now, what do we want to do? Well, we want to apply this using a filter. Okay. Now, there's different types of filters that you can do. What I want to do is I'm going to come up here to Effect, and this is going to show you some of the various filters that you can apply. And a little bit later, I'm going to show you the effects rack. But for now, what I want to look at is, let's just take a look at maybe amplitude and compression. So we can see there's lots of little filters that we can apply. The one we're looking for is going to be a noise reduction. So I'm going to come on down here and you can see there is one called noise reduction. Okay. In here, you can also see the option to capture a noise print. Now it's grayed out right now because I don't have anything selected. And honestly, it doesn't matter because I already have that capture. All we need to do now is use the noise reduction. Okay? So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to get a new dialog box here. So what this is going to show me is using that capture that I created earlier, it is applying that capture to the entire audio piece here. Now, if I had another selection, maybe I just had one piece of the audio that I wanted to apply this to, I could make a selection and this would just display the noise print on that section. Okay? So here's the thing. For the most part, you can just use it out of the box. You really don't have to make too many adjustments, but there are lots of adjustments, more than what we can get into here. The thing that I like to use is just these two. Just keep it simple. The noise reduction and then how much is it being reduced. Okay? So down at the very, very bottom here, there's a power button and I'm going to toggle it off so you can see what's happening here. So that's off and I'm going to toggle it back on. So what it's saying is that this reduction, this filter is in play right now. It is on. If I hit the play button here, we're going to hear our audio track with this filter applied. So it's a preview of it. And then of course I have a little repeat or loop here. So I'm going to play it.
Reliable and energy efficient.
Okay. Now it's going to loop back.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now?
Okay.
How much in lost
Now the really cool
downtime
thing about
would it
this
save
is
you
that if
we
I
could
hit the
reduce
play
that number,
button
say,
while
by
it's
half?
playing back,
When was the last time your line shut down because of a frozen pipeline or valve? How much in lost sales did that cost your company? Hi, I'm Tom Perry.
so what you're hearing is the original track. So I can toggle the power button on and off for this filter to hear a before and an after. And I don't have my headset on right now, so I can't tell exactly where it needs to be, but I'm going to go ahead and just turn this on. And then the noise reduction. This is how much reduction is happening here. It's cranked up to the maximum right now. I'm going to take that down just a little bit. And what you're going to see is this graph up here change. So I'm going to crank it down way down. So you can see there's my threshold. This green is my threshold. So this is what I'm dropping down to. So if I get down here, now I'm just basically introducing all of that noise. So the red is where it measured that noise, and then as that green goes up, it's getting further away from that noise. So it's reducing more and more of that noise. So that's the actual noise reduction. And you may have to max it out. You may not need as much. So I want to back it off about 90% in this particular case. And then I also have this value here. So how much do I reduce by? How many decibels should it drop? Okay. Well, that really depends on the noise itself. Now, in this case, my noise, I can look over here to the far right and I can see the spikes on that noise. And they're spiking out at about -36. So this is at 40. And then actually, that's probably pretty good. If I lower this just a little bit, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to drop this to about the 30, I'm going to do about 34 because I think that's a little bit less than that. We'll drop it down about 34 decibels. And that should work out pretty well. Now, another thing that you can do, if you can't really hear the difference as you play, is another feature I really like using. It says output noise only. If I turn this on and hit the play button, right now I shouldn't hear anything or very little of anything. If I turn the power button off,
Our innovative
I should be able to
processing
hear
systems have been reducing costs,
everything.
preventing problems, and
If I
optimizing.
turn it back on, I should hear just the noise. And so if I'm hearing just noise, I'm not hearing my narrator speak, then I know I've got these values set pretty close, and that's probably where they should be. So output noise only. It only works if the filter is powered on, and it will only play the noises that it is filtering. So as long as you hear noise and none of the content that you want to keep, then you're good to go. I'm going to uncheck that,
Lost sales, that
so we'll
cost
hear
your
everything. We'll hear our
Hi,
narration,
I'm Tom
but
Perry,
no noise.
founder and president of QMax Industries.
Pretty awesome.
A small company.
I'm going to stop that playback. I'm going to click apply. And now look at my waveform here. Look, we've got all these nice little flat areas. That is so awesome. I'm going to zoom into this area here once again. Oh, look at that. It's so nice and flat now. It's nice and quiet. So if I were to undo that, that's what we had before. Look at all that noise in there. See the spikes? Let's redo it. Nice and flat. Now, of course, it is also going to flatten some of this in here as well. So that's why you have to be careful with those two sliders. And that's where that noise, show the noise only or listen to the noise only is really, really handy. You are going to adjust the overall loudness or amplitude of the entire thing here, but that's okay. We've gotten rid of the noise where we needed to. Now, if we need to boost or amplify the sound everywhere else, we can do that as well. So, using a fingerprint or noise print to reduce that background noise. Now we have a sound that's a little closer to being almost studio-like. No ambient noise, which is great. All right, well, let's take a look at some of the other things that we can do while we're here in this particular section. Okay. So what about maybe identifying noises? So I'm gonna just go back here. I'm gonna use the little scroll bar up here at the very top, and I'm gonna scroll all the way back here to the very, very beginning. Because there was a little noise up here, and I want to take a listen here. It's right here at the beginning.
How many of your
Okay, did you hear that? Let me kind of highlight just that area for you so you can hear it. Okay, so the little spike right here, that's a lip smack. Just happens, and then a small inhale. So something like this, you probably want to edit this out. I still want to keep the same amount of time. Different ways to handle this, you know, perhaps the easiest way is just to highlight the area and then use your adjust amplitude, that can kill it. Or if you have a nice quiet area like this, where it is just the bare minimum of the background, you know, you could certainly apply that. You could copy and paste over it. So I think for our purposes here, just for speed, I'm just going to highlight this, and I'm going to use my little amplify adjustment here, amplitude adjustment, I'm sorry. And I'm just going to adjust that down, okay? So that works pretty good. It's set for the little lip smack. So then I can make another selection here, and I can reduce that as well. Perfect. And so now that'll get rid of that. So anytime I see these little spikes like this, I just kind of highlight them and reduce them. Really quick, really easy. You're going to see this a lot in narrative tracks. You know, right before you start seeing some large spikes here, before your narrator gets into the actual speaking part. Usually we inhale a little bit so we can highlight that section and just reduce it, like so. Doesn't have to be completely gone, but the more that you can reduce that, well, then the better it is going to sound. So you're not going to hear the inhales. And like I said, it's a little more work involved, but you can go through and find those areas and then wipe them out. Now, some people ask, well, can't you use that same kind of a fingerprint test for that? Maybe, but you run the risk of killing some other sounds within the narrative that you want to keep. So generally it's a good idea to run your noise print first, make sure you get a nice clean background sound, and then either copy and paste the background sound over these inhales or do like what I'm doing here. Just use the amplitude adjustment and just reduce them. So identifying and removing these sounds. Now another way to do this is using a different display. So let's take a look at that spectral frequency display. And this is really, really interesting stuff here. So let's take a look. So I get a bit of a chuckle when I think about this spectral frequency display. This thing is really, really awesome. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to the bottom below the waveform, and I'm just going to drag this up because I want to keep the waveform there just so you can kind of see it, but then I want to show you this spectral frequency display. This display is also really great for being able to target either unwanted sounds or finding that noise print that you want. So normally, if it's dead silent, the spectral frequency display is black. Anywhere we start to see purples, orange, red, yellow, obviously that's noise. So right now this thing has been cleaned up once, so this background here is pretty darn dark. But we do have a few sounds in here. So we can start to see some purple in here. That's a little bit of maybe the ambient noise. Now, if you find something like a cell phone ring, those are notorious for showing up. They're going to show up as little spikes like so. So there's going to be some brighter sounds here, if you will. Like the higher pitch ring is going to be, well, it's going to be a little higher up this scale. Remember, this vertical scale here is your frequency. So the higher it up it is, the higher the pitch, the more treble it is. The lower it is. So if I'm listening for a train rumbling outside the room there, I'm going to be looking down here, down on the lower end for that sound because that's a lower pitch. It's a more rumbling, low end sound. So this is what we do. We identify these sounds, and this thing is so awesome. Whenever I am working in the spectral frequency, I can highlight or click and drag to highlight a sound like so. Now this actually is a part where my actor is speaking, but if I were to take that then, I could do various things. I could delete the sound. If I just hit the delete button, it deletes it, and now that is just dead air. Now that's going to be a little abrupt, okay? So I'm going to have some of the low end, but all this mid-range here, it's killing that, okay? So if we just take a listen.
In lost downtime.
And that was very, very brief, so I don't know if you could even pick up on that or not. But, you know, basically I have just killed that sound at that point.
How much in lost?
See there? How much? I got the ch in the much. I got those higher end frequencies of the CH being pronounced. They're just cut out. So I'm going to undo that, obviously. Edit, undo, okay? Now, one of the other things that you could do with something like this, if you found a sound that you didn't want, okay? And let's just say that that was just a little too much there. Instead of highlighting it and deleting it, what I can do is use a different tool. Now, I'm a big Photoshop guy. I love Photoshop and I use it all the time. Now, what does Photoshop and Adobe Audition have to do with one another? Well, not much, but they do share a tool here. So I'm going to use an image editing tool to edit my audio. And this is something that the folks at Adobe have done for you. The engineers here have taken this tool and brought it over here, and it's really, really amazing. And what it's going to allow me to do is find a sound, remove that sound, but then blend it into the background so we don't actually hear the adjustment being made. It's just the sound is gone, and it seems more natural. So let's take a look at this amazing tool. Now this tool only works when I'm in this spectral frequency mode. So let's just say that the ch sound here is what I want to remove. Let's just say for whatever reason that's what it is. I'm going to come up here to the top. And up here at the top, right below my menu bar, I have my toolbar. Now, when I'm in this spectral frequency mode, different tools are available to me. I have a standard time selection tool. I have an area selection tool, or what we call a marquee selection. I also have this lasso tool, which is kind of interesting because it allows me to then, instead of creating squares for selection, I can say, well, I want to select this area and then this area. And it allows me to adjust that entire area, okay? So kind of interesting. The paintbrush tool here will allow me to paint a selection, so it's a little more organic. I'm just painting a selection here. But the one that I'm really interested in here, and I think is so amazing, now all of these are all of these are Photoshop tools, but the one that's the most intriguing to me, the one I'm most excited about is this, Spot Healing Brush. This thing is amazing. What it allows me to do is paint a selection. Now, when I paint this, normally that's going to make a selection, but in this case, it's going to make a selection and it's going to clean up that selection. Now watch this. Instead of a solid block of black, it actually filled in the blanks here with some noise that is found around it. So it's a little more natural sounding. Now, of course, this is right in the middle of his speech, so it's going to sound funny, but take a listen.
How much in lost down?
You see, it's not maybe as abrupt. It still sounds funny because I caught him right in the middle of his speech. But if you have something like a cell phone noise in the background, this might be one way that you could remove that sound. So all you're doing is just kind of scrubbing through your content here, and you're just looking for these sounds. Once again, I'm going to just move this all the way up. I am looking for where this sound occurs. Higher up is a higher pitch sound, lower down is a more bass or lower pitched sound. So once again, I can just go in here, I can just paint certain areas, and it's just going to automatically heal that section. I can even do this right in the middle of a sound like this. You see there's a lot of noise going on here, whatever this is. You know, this is his narrative. If I paint over this section, it's going to try to rebuild that section. It's not going to go completely blank. So once again, it's just going to make this adjustment seem more realistic. It's a more natural sounding. Instead of just simply cutting a noise out, it kind of fades in, fades out automatically for you. Truly, truly amazing. So the Spot Healing Brush, a Photoshop tool, an image editing tool inside of an Adobe, an Audition, a sound editing tool. Amazing, amazing. And I just get so excited about that. Anytime I get something that carries over from Photoshop, man, I just love it. So hopefully you can find some use for that. I think you will. I think the more you use that tool, the more you're going to fall in love with it, just like me. All right, well, what else have we got for this particular piece of audio? Well, we've cleaned out the background noise. We've identified some noisy areas, maybe using the spectral frequency display here, and we've cleaned that up. So what else can we do? Well, let's take a look. So perhaps the next thing we should do is take a look at enhancing audio. So we've cleaned up some audio. What happens when we have audio that's relatively clean, but we need to enhance it a little bit? We need to, well, maybe adjust it for quality. It's not bad, but could we make it better? Okay. So in this particular section, I want to take a look at the use of filters. We've seen one filter here. We're going to take a look at some of the other filters and what they do. Some EQ, some equalization adjustments. Maybe using a couple of these. I can't go into too much detail there, but I do want to show you what the EQ is and how you can use it. I want to show you how to quickly change or enhance pitch, and then also just enhancements for voice. And then if we have some time here, I want to try to mix a narrative in with another audio, maybe a background music, okay? So enhancing your audio files. I'm going to jump back over to Audition here. Okay. So earlier we saw that we could capture a noise print, so I make a selection. I'm going to use this, if I use this magic wand tool, or I'm sorry, not the magic wand, but the adjustment tool here, it's going to automatically do it. It's not really what I want. I'm going to cancel that. And I'm just going to go back, edit, undo, auto heal. Didn't mean to do that. So what I want to do is make a selection. So you have to be careful of that. If you're using the paintbrush, just remember what tool you have selected. And you saw it's very easy to just kind of forget where you are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up here. I'm going to grab my time selection tool. And now I can select a range of time. Now it's getting the entire frequency range. It doesn't care. It just says over amount of time here, grab all of the sound in that area. So I'm back to the normal highlighting like I have in the waveform. So, oops, it's not letting me grab this. There we go. I wanted to split this so I could see the waveform again. So if I wanted to, let's say, apply a filter to maybe just a portion of it, I can select just that section. In this case, I probably want to apply an adjustment to the entire track here. And for my purposes here, I'm going to go ahead and close my spectral frequency display and just look at the sound here. Once again, this is captured from video, and to me, it's a little bit quiet in here, so I think I'm going to maybe amplify this a little bit. Now, I can do this once again with this particular amplitude adjustment, but that's kind of a linear adjustment. It's applying it everywhere. Everything gets boosted, and that's not really what I want. So I'm going to reset this back to 0. And what I want to do is maybe selectively adjust it. Now I could go in here and I can highlight a section and adjust, and then highlight another section and adjust, but it's going to take too long. So there's some filters that maybe could help us with this and other problems. I'm going to go back to my effects panel, or effects menu here. And I do have an effects panel, if you will, but it's called an effects rack. Okay? So this is going to open a panel there where my files panel was. In fact, it's grouped with it. And I have this rack here, if you will. It's kind of a staging area. And each one of these stages, and there's 16 of them in this particular file, I have little power buttons. Okay? Toggles that particular filter on and off. The really amazing thing about this is the fact that I can stagger or stack up to 16 different filters in this case, and then see how they affect one another. So how are they interacting with one another as they're being applied to my audio file here? Now, how do I select these things? Well, one, you could go back to the effects menu here, and you could select something like, oh, let's say a delay and echo here. If I apply one of these items here, one of these filters here, it is applying it directly to the audio file. I'm going to get a little preview, but when I hit OK, it's going to apply it directly to it. So if you don't like it, well, it's too bad. It's already done. The damage is done. So the effects rack allows you to kind of test and try out some filters before you apply them. So I really like using this. Now, not all of the filters are available. The noise print the noise reduction, that's not available here. Oops, right here. This little guy. Anything that says process, not going to be available to you as an effects rack option. Now, how do you apply these in the effects rack? Well, come over here to the effects rack, and I'll just start with number 1 here. You could start with any of them, but I'll just start here, and there's a little drop down here to the right. I click on that, and then these are the options that are available to me. So if I go into that noise reduction and restoration, you can see that, well, that noise reduction process is not here. It's not available to me. Okay? All right, so what am I looking to do? This is where the terminology becomes very important to you. I'm looking to increase the sound, increase the volume. That's amplitude. Aha. So I have different ways to amplify this. There's a standard amplify, there's a channel mixer, there's all types of things in here. Okay? So I'm going to choose the standard amplify here. And this works very much like the little amplitude adjustment right here at the very top. But in this way, I can do it independently. Left and right channel. If I unlink those sliders, I can put a little more volume on the left channel than the right, or vice versa. Now, I normally keep them linked together. Okay? And then I can adjust this. So if I start dragging this to the right, I'm going to adjust it. Oh, I'm going to go up by about 5 or 6. I'm going to put it somewhere right in here between. Okay? And then if I were to hit the space bar,
If we could reduce that
I would
number,
start
say,
playing
by
back
half.
this audio file.
When was the last time your line shut down because of a frozen pipeline or valve?
Okay?
How much in lost sales did that cost your company? Hi, I'm Tom Perry, founder and president of QMax Industries, a small company that makes a big difference for the customers that we serve.
Okay, so that's about right. I just adjust the sounds until it sounds about right to me. I'm also watching the meters over here to the far right, and there's also an extra set of meters here at the bottom of my effects rack. So I have an input meter and an output. Okay, so when this is applied, the output is what I'm looking at. Now in my case, I cranked it up really, really high, and I hope I didn't bother anyone with that, but you can see I have these little red markers here. They're also going to be over here in my levels meter. That's letting me know, whoops, you stepped out of bounds there, William. You went a little too high, and you started to distort your audio. Now I'm going to close this window here. So that is an amplify adjustment right there in the effects rack. Okay? So it hasn't applied it to my file yet. It's just putting it there, and when I do my playback, okay? So if I just come down here and hit play,
Innovative process heating systems have been reducing costs, preventing problems.
I'm hearing that adjustment, even though it hasn't been made yet. So it's kind of like just layered on top. Now I can also toggle on and off the power for this effects rack. That's found right here in the lower left-hand corner of the effects rack. So when you do this here, it's kind of like a master power button. If I apply more effects, which I'm going to do now, I'm going to go to the second slot here, and we'll click the little arrow here. And maybe I want to maybe make an equalization adjustment, okay? So filter and EQ. Now the ones that I generally use here for just general adjustment, okay, those are the graphic equalizers. Now it's up to you which one you choose. It really depends. If you need more finite control, then you want more bands, okay, different areas that you can control. If you don't need as much control, you can go with one of the lower bands. So I'm going to use a 10 band here. So graphic equalizer, 10 band. And once again, while you don't necessarily have to see the waveform back here in the back, a lot of times what I do just out of habit is just kind of slide these out of the way so I can see where I'm playing in my file here. I can see what noise is playing, because a lot of times I identify different areas in here and I want to see how it's affecting that particular area. So once again, I'm going to hit the space bar here to start playing back my sound, and I do have it in loop, so it will loop for me.
And optimizing operations for years. Let me show you how QMax products can quantifiably reduce your...
Okay, so if I want to maybe adjust my narrator's voice, one, I have to kind of identify where that is. Now, generally speaking, you know, we're between, what we can hear is between 20 hertz and 20,000. So even beyond what this particular effects rack or this EQ can adjust. But the human voice is right around the 16K on the high end, and I think right around between the 1 and 500K. So right in here is the range of a normal human voice. Now, of course, there's variances there. People with deeper voices probably go a little lower than that. I can play around with these different settings. Now I'm just going to let the sound play back, and I'm going to start adjusting some of these.
Costs while making your operations significantly more reliable and energy efficient. That was the best. How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now?
Okay.
How much in lost downtime?
So as you can see, basically what this is doing is a lot like a amplitude adjustment, but instead of amplifying all of the sounds, I'm choosing which frequency to amplify. Which frequency should I bring up and or bring down? So Let's keep listening here.
Would it save you if we could reduce that number, say, by half? When was the last time your line shut down because of a frozen pipeline or valve? How much in lost sales did that cost your company? Hi, I'm Tom Perry, founder and president of QMax Industries, a small company that makes a big difference for the customers that we serve. Our innovative process heating systems have been reducing costs, preventing problems.
Okay, so I've just made a few adjustments here. I boosted the low end just a little bit. This kind of mid-range, I kind of brought it down just a touch, and then some of these higher ends I started bringing it up a little higher to give his voice a little more crispness. Okay, so it just sounded a little better to me, and it's very difficult because I don't have my headset on. So hopefully this is pretty close. Okay, so if you're not sure which of these adjustments you should make, always just play around with it. Remember, this is in the effects rack, so you're not really harming any files here yet. Now there's also some presets up here, and these are kind of interesting. So there's two down here at the very bottom, vocal presence boost and vocal presence cut. So if you're unsure, but you know you want to boost a narrative, you might start with this one, vocal presence boost. And you can see it's picking that mid-tone there, that 2K, and it's pushing it up, but leaving the rest of this down. Okay, so it's really up to you, but you know, you can choose the little presets here. If I actually liked my sound, like if I pull this back and I wanted to make this a little bit tinnier here, pull this down a little bit, and I'm going to boost that end. So pull this one down too. So this is about where I had it before. If I like this, I can save this as a profile as well. So I can save it as a preset. So I might make my adjustment and then save it. Okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this a name that I know I can use on this same narrator again and again and again, because I've got more tracks that I want to edit and I want them to be the same. So I can just save this. We'll call this QMax, and the gentleman's name was Tom, so I'm going to call it QMax Tom. And that way I know I can apply this to Tom's voice and get pretty darn close. I can always go back in and modify it later. But there you have it. Applying filters here. Okay? So using the EQ. It's a great way. Now, some of you who are like me, a little bit older, probably remember an EQ as part of your stereo equipment. Long before we had the smartphones and the other MP3 players, we had radios and cassettes and record players. And so we had an EQ so we can adjust the sound coming out of there to whatever it is we wanted. So this does basically the same thing, it's just in a digital form. We can control what is louder. Is the bass louder, or is a certain frequency range louder or reduced? Okay, so an EQ. All right, what else have we got? Let's take a look at some other enhancements that we want to make to this file. So as you can see over here in the effects rack, I've got both of those effects applied at the same time. At any given point, I can play back the sound and I can just toggle the power button off for that particular effect. And that way I can kind of see how are these two effects combining together. Are they working together well, or do I need to go back in and make adjustments? Okay. Now what about pitch? Adjusting pitch. Now adjusting the pitch is adjusting, it's adjusting the frequency. How often that waveform is striking our eardrums. Remember, the more often it strikes, the higher the pitch. So there are pitch adjustments, but you have to be careful, because if you're adjusting that frequency, you're adjusting timing. Fortunately, Adobe Audition gives you some ways to work around that. So once again, I'm going to go here to my effects rack. I'm going to click the third option here, or the third track here, and let's see what we've got. So in here I've got different things, but here, time and pitch. Okay, there is an automatic pitch correction, so it will try to listen or evaluate the sounds here and adjust it for you, or you can just adjust it on your own. And it's always a lot more fun to adjust it on your own. So let's try the pitch shifter here. And this thing is just a whole lot of fun. So it's very useful, don't get me wrong, but you're going to see how much fun it can also be. So I'm going to start playing back the soundtrack here.
Problems and optimizing operations for years. Let me show you how QMax products can quantifiably reduce your cost.
All right. Now, let's say I want to adjust his pitch. Once again, I have presets up here. So just in celebration of today here being the release of Star Wars, how about we go to the Dark Lord here. Let's see what we get. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to be a particular character here, but let's take a listen.
While making your operation significantly more reliable and energy efficient. How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now?
pretty crazy, huh? I'm going to adjust this.
When was the last time your line shut down? Because
so now we have a little more of maybe a robotic or kind of a noise here.
How much in lost sales did that cost your company?
Okay. So that's adjusting the semitones. Now you can also adjust here.
Of QMax Industries, a small company that makes a big difference for the customers that we serve. Our innovative process heating systems have been reducing
Make it a little more of a robotic kind of a sound, maybe Android type of sound. If I go the other way,
let me show you how QMax products can quantifiably reduce your costs
while making your operation significantly more reliable and energy
now we have another kind of a robotic sound here. So as you can see, there's different little presets up here.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now? How much
in lost downtime would it save you if we could reduce that number, say?
So you see what I mean? How much fun this can be. My producer over here is just rolling in the chair laughing at this, and that's great. So yes, you can create special effects types of sounds if you need to do that sort of thing, but maybe just the timing is off just a little bit, and you just want to adjust the pitch just a little bit. Minor adjustments in this particular pitch shifter will make a huge difference here. So smaller is better in this particular case, unless you really want to create those crazy sounds. But you can adjust pitch. So notice that when we did this, what's happening in the background is Audition, in order to do that, is stretching the sound out or stretching these waveforms out or compressing them, but it's also trying to keep the same amount of time. So my audio file or my narrative is, let's say, 1.5 minutes long, is trying to keep that same amount of time and just changing the pitch of the voice. So pretty amazing stuff there. Well, let's keep going with this, and let me make a minor adjustment to the pitch here, and we'll apply it. All right, so what we've seen here is this is pretty crazy stuff here. I'm going to pull this back. It's going to be a very minor adjustment. I think in my case, I'd like to richen it up a little bit, so I'm going to slow it down just ever so slightly here, and let's give it a listen.
By half. When was the last time your line shut down because of a frozen pipeline or valve? How much in lost sales did that cost your company? Hi, I'm Tom Perry, founder and president of QMax Industries, a small company that makes a big difference for the customers.
Sounds a little bit better. Once again, this is very minor adjustments, and having the headset on would definitely be a boost here for me now. Anyway, there we go. Making a minor adjustment, and like I said, I can save this as well, so I might save this, and I might call this something very similar, QMax. This is Tom, and I'm gonna actually append to it. I'm gonna call it slow pitch. Okay, it's because I'm slowing it down a little bit. There we go. So I'll dismiss this window, and so now you can see my effects rack is starting to fill up here. So that's just one adjustment you can make for the voice. There are other filters in here for adjusting for your voice. You could go into something like the reverb. If you're getting a lot of noises that are kind of bouncing around from the environment, the reverb section is great for that because you can kind of remove some of that. You're not going to remove all of it, but it can help with some of that. this tool is really intended to actually add some reverberation in there if you need it. So you can give it kind of the sound of Tom here speaking in an amphitheater, or in a big room, or maybe in a small closet. It can change the reverberation in that room. So there you go. Delay and echo, very similar. I can put a small delay on it so you can get a little bit of the reverberation as well. It's another way to go about that. All right, so once we have these filters, if you will, kind of put into place, down here at the bottom, there's a really finite control here. So once I've kind of got them adjusted where I want, maybe it's not just perfect, I can give it a listen.
Have been reducing costs, preventing problems, and optimizing operations.
And right here it says mix, dry to wet. So wet just means, hey, I'm applying all of these filters full strength, okay? Whatever I set them in here. So if this one is at 25% or whatever, and this one's at 50 and this was at 15 or whatever, that's fine. That's the maximum they can be when this thing is set to full wet. If I pull it back, I'm basically pulling back all of these respectively. So it's one last adjustment, kind of finite. So let's give it a listen.
For years. Let me show you how QMAX products can
Full dry here,
reduce your costs,
no adjustment,
while making your operations significantly more reliable and energy efficient.
When I push it to the far right,
That was best.
that is applying.
How many of
those
your steam
filters
traps are not
completely.
functioning?
Okay, so once again, I can see that little spike there. So that's telling me, hey, there's a spot here where Tom is a little bit loud. Okay, yep, he's getting a little high there.
How many?
Yep. And even though it doesn't show it here, it's showing it like this spike is not reaching all the way up, but over here it is in the levels. I can see that. So I would adjust that, and this is going to be that amplify. I'm probably going to have to just take this down just a little bit. So I'm going to cut that. Whoa, not 30. I'm going to cut it in half there. I'm going to pull this back.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning?
Okay, so not too bad. What I probably would want to do is go ahead and apply this, and then maybe come back over just this one section and tone that down just a little bit more. So there we have it. I think I'm pretty happy with this. So now I'm ready to apply this. So down here at the bottom of my effects rack, I click the apply button, and it's going to apply it to what? Just the selection. I want the entire file. Click apply, and it makes that adjustment. And so now I can actually see here where that spike is. You see it's going off the screen here. So I might take this particular section, and then I can adjust it manually here. I'm just going to pull it back a little bit so Tom doesn't jump out of our speakers at us here.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now?
And you see it didn't sound too bad. It's not too abrupt of a change. Nice. All right, so as you can see, there was tons of filters and adjustments that you can apply. We've just really touched the tip of the iceberg with all of the adjustments. And that's really all we can cover in a sprint course like this. So my suggestion to you is really just grab some files and experiment on your own. Try out some of the different filters and see what they do. Your best bet is to learn as much as you can about the audio terminology. Now, I gave you just 3 terms there. But learn more about those terms and what they mean, and that's going to help you out when you are selecting filters, because a lot of them are named by those same terms, and then also being able to identify the noises and the different areas in your audio files that you may need to adjust. All right. Well, we come to the point in our exercise here where it's time to maybe mix some files together and go ahead and publish them. So I'm going to cover both of those in this same section. So far we've been dealing with just one file at a time. Well, what happens when I want to take this narrative track and then maybe put an audio track behind it? I could do this in my e-learning tool, but I'm going to prefer to do it here in Audition. That way I can have a little more control over all of those audio files. So let's take a look. So here, I'm going to go ahead and save this file. Okay. And that saves those adjustments. And up here at the top, there is a multi-track. Okay. So I've been working in the Waveform Editor, and I'm going to open up my multi-track editor. And it wants to create a new multi-track session. So I'm going to call this Tom Mixdown. Okay. And I'm going to navigate to where I want to place this. I'm going to put this also in my little project folder here. You have different templates for the different types of mixes that you want to use here. You know, I don't have one in particular that I want to use, so I'm going to just choose none. Sample rate 4800, bit depth 32, master stereo. Okay, so basically just the defaults here. Tell it OK. And now what I'm allowed to do is have multiple tracks, and then I can add sounds to those tracks. Okay, and this will allow me to change different properties. Okay, so you know, here I can pick up, you know, from audio hardware here, I can, you know, do a number of things. If I maybe insert or import audio files, I can drop them in here. So let's see here. I've got my remove sound here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag from my files panel and just drop this into track 1. Okay? So that's the narrative track we were just working on. That's Tom.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now?
Okay, cool. Now I need to get a file for the second track, the background music. So what I'm going to do is, just because I like to work this way, is I like to go ahead and import it over here in the Files panel. So I'm going to just double click in the Files panel. And I'll go to my lessons here, and I'm going to grab my background music. Okay, grab that, open it up. And this way I can come over here and I can double click on it. I can edit it independently. And then when I'm ready, come over here. Whoops, didn't mean to do it that way. I meant to come over here. And I can just drag it and drop it into this second track. Okay? Now, these two have a different sample rate. Okay? So I'm just going to tell this OK, and it's going to match it. Okay? So they had slightly different sample rates. Now they're matched. All right, let's take a listen. Now we're going to have Tom and the background music at the same time.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now? How much in lost?
Okay, so I can hear Tom, but I'm hearing the music, and we can see this here in the waveforms. These waveforms, they're much higher, so you know it's a louder, it's more amplified, so it's louder. So what do I want to do here? Well, I want to obviously reduce those. Okay. I'm also going to go ahead and apply a little bit of a fade in. So just like in the Waveform Editor here, I can just drag this and create this little effect here. I'm going to just let it fade in like so.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right?
Okay. So we got a nice little fade. I'm going to just pull this down a little bit. Here's the nice thing about this is that waveform doesn't actually get affected until I actually apply it. So I can keep adjusting that.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now?
Cool. I can also do this. Maybe Tom is coming in a little too soon. I can grab Tom's track here and drag him to the right. And that's still going to take the same amount of time. It's just Tom's not going to come in until a little later.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning?
Pretty cool. Well, I'm going to adjust Tom just a little bit more, and then the overall sound here of the background track. Okay, a little too loud. There is a little bar here that I can use to add different anchor points to. So if I come down here, this is a little volume bar. It's kind of a yellow sound here, and I can add these little anchor points. So if I drag this bar down, I'm just going to leave it here. Let's take a listen.
How many of your steam traps are not functioning right now?
See, that audio is just barely there. So I'm going to pull that back up a little bit. And then I'm going to add, oh, let's see, I'm going to pull this out about here, and then I'm going to add another one of these little anchor points. Now when I add this second anchor point, what will happen is I can fade that music down. So I've got a little fade here on the beginning, but then as Tom starts to talk, I want to fade this music out so that we can hear more of Tom, less of the music. Let's take a listen.
How much in lost downtime would it save you if we could reduce that number, say, by half? When was the last time your line shut down because of a frozen pipeline or valve? How much in lost sales did that cost your company? Hi, I'm Tom Perry.
Okay, so we can see that gradual lowering of the volume. So the distance, horizontal distance between these two anchor points is the level of the fade, the curvature of the fade. And what I'm trying to do here is get this point right in here is where that music starts to get loud. So I want to start taking that down here. Now I can also do the same here on Tom's track. There is an audio track here. So if I wanted to push Tom's volume up a little bit, this is just an amplitude adjustment. So I can do that.
I'm president of QMax Industries, a small company that makes a big difference for the customers that we serve.
So now I've mixed these two tracks together. I'm going to save this. It's telling me that these are in different folders. They're located outside of the session folder, and would I like to copy those media files into the session folder? So I can either choose to do that or I can leave them where they are. It will reference them, but what it's trying to do for me is go ahead and make duplicates of my audio files and put them together with this particular mixed track. Okay, so I'm going to tell it yes, and there we go. All right, so we're coming to a close here. This is just a very simple edit here of mixing multiple tracks here. I've just mixed two tracks. You can mix multiple tracks, and depending on which preset you get, you're going to get fewer tracks or more tracks. It's really up to you. You can always add and delete tracks. There's plenty of other adjustments here for listening to those tracks, but that should get you started. Mixing a narrative maybe with a music background here. And the output from this is going to be one file that has both of those audio files in it. So how do we export this content? And I'm going to export this particular file here. This could also work for your other single files. We'll take a look at that process as well. So I'm going to export just Tom as a narrative, and then Tom mixed together with the background music. Let's take a look. So here is my multi-track session here. I've saved it, and so it's saved as its own file type. And so this is unique for Audition. I can't place this file type inside of my e-learning project. What I need to do now is really just publish this. So I'm going to go to the File menu, and I'm going to come right down here where it says Export. Okay. So I'm going to do, let's say, a multi-track mixdown, and I'm going to do the entire session. Okay. Now I can choose my file type up here at the top. So my format. What do I want to work with? Well, I'm going to go ahead just for file size here. I'm going to mix it down as an MP3 audio. Now it's going to give me some compression, which is great. That's what I'm looking for here. I want to reduce the file size as much as possible. I'm going to change where it's going to mix this down. So I'm going to go to my desktop, go to my projects folder here, and I'm going to put it right inside this folder. Okay? So I'm just going to create an MP3 from this mix track. Okay? I don't need to include any markers or metadata, and I don't necessarily need to open the files after the export. So I'm going to turn those two options off. The rest of this I'm going to leave as is. Honestly, I probably could, if I wanted to compress a little more size out of this, I could change the compression settings here. I could drop this. I mean, there's really no need for it to be necessarily this high. I could drop this a little bit. These are my sample rates here. Maybe go a little less than this if you want. 192 is kind of a nice middle of the road here. I'm going to drop it down to 128. Now, hopefully it's going to give me a little more compression there. Okay, and I'll just tell this okay. And so it should just spit it out pretty quick for me. But that's it. I've just created an MP3 file. out of a multi-track session. Now what about those single sessions, okay? So I'm going to go back to this particular file. Now this is just a file with just Tom, doing his speaking part. This might be one of those situations where you just need to save this out as a different form. Now it is coming in as a WAV file, and you can use it as is. Most of your e-learning tools will accept this file format, but if they don't, well, it's the same thing. Just go over here to the File menu, and I can choose an export, and I can just export the file. So a little bit different here, but very similar. I'm going to turn off the markers, don't really need those, and I just choose the file type. So once again, I might choose an MP3 in this case. Where do I want to put it? It's going to go into my project folder here. So let's put it in my project folder. I'm not going to put it in the mix down, so I can just keep them apart. There we go. And OK. Now, it's telling me this time around that, hey, listen, you're taking this down to an MP3. So it's giving me a warning that it's going to be saved to a compressed file format. And that's OK. I still have my original WAV file. And if I ever needed to make a change to this file, I would use the WAV file, not the MP3. And so there we have it. I've exported both a multi-track session down to an MP3 and then just a single track session into an MP3. So I choose an MP3 because that's a nice generic file format as far as audio is concerned. It is compressed, so I'm going to get a little bit smaller file size. And that's going to work well within my e-learning tools such as Storyline or Captivate. And that's really it. Editing audio files is very, very easy with this wonderful, wonderful tool, Adobe Audition. I hope that you have found this very informative, and look for future sessions where we maybe do a little more with this very powerful tool, maybe combine it with some of the other audio and video tools that Adobe has to offer. Well, that's it for this particular session. Once again, my name is William Everhart, and this is BrightStreamTV. We'll see you next time.